Jason Martell, world-renowned researcher, lecturer specializing in the ancient Sumerian culture, Sumer's advanced technology, and how it relates to Planet X. Backed by leading scientists from the mainstream scientific community, Mr. Martell has appeared on many television and radio programs. Looking forward, Mr. Martell is preparing to conduct several groundbreaking international research expeditions. His goal is always to gain first-hand access to ancient Sumerian artifacts and other archaeological relics not currently accessible to you. By bringing worldwide attention to these hidden artifacts, Mr. Martell hopes to usher in a new era in the ancient astronaut theory. Jason Martell. Jason, always a pleasure. How are you?
Hi, George. Norrie. Wow, it's a pleasure to talk to you again.
Too long. We got to get you back more often, my friend.
Oh, thank you, sir.
One of the topics so dear to my heart, and a friend of mine out at the nighthawkzone.com, Bad Boy, I think he stays up all week when he knows you're on because the ancient astronaut theory is incredible. Tell me a little about what you've been doing, though, since you were last on with me December 2006, right?
I believe so. It's kind of been a while,
yeah,
you know.
It has. What have you been doing in between?
Well, keeping busy as usual. I've been fortunate enough to do a little bit of traveling, and I did speak in Brazil last year, about the ancient astronaut research. So, I was trying to just stayed on the cusp of the story of, breaking news for things that happen, archaeological discoveries, things that we can tie in to get a clearer picture for using modern science and look at the ancient knowledge, the ancient evidence in a new light.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. And talking about breaking news,
yes.
Not too long ago, Japanese group of researchers from Kobe University said that they believe that there could be a planet X in the solar system. What do you think of that?
I think it's some very exciting news. Obviously, George, you and I have been going back and forth on this esoteric topic, the idea of another planet in our solar system. The modern science today would label it a 10th planet, meaning, we have 9 planets, Pluto being 9th. There'd be a planet beyond Pluto. So it's very interesting that, once again, we have a resurgence in the scientific astronomical community for a focus to say, gentlemen, there is possibly another object in our solar system. So this, of course, raises the eyebrow of researchers like myself who, for many reasons are interested in why would we even be looking for a planet in our solar system. But for a long time now, even since 1930 when Pluto was first discovered, we've been looking for a planet X. So it hasn't been an established astronomical norm yet, and it's great to see for researchers like myself and others who are interested in this topic that it is resurfacing again in the astronomical community.
5 years ago, I would say, Jason, the mere mention of a planet X in the solar system would have been scoffed at by most astronomers.
Sure.
I don't think the majority would do that anymore. What do you think?
Yes, well, we've had, the thing is the reason why this topic has gotten so convoluted, and we'll explain to the listeners tonight why we're even talking about a planet X, but anyone who's followed this topic, ever since around 2004, this started to make headlines again, and it hadn't since the early 80s. We started to see things out in in our solar system beyond Pluto, where astronomers, for instance, found Xena or Quoar. And these are basically just large chunks of ice, very large chunks of ice, floating beyond Pluto, so large, in fact, that we can't classify them as a planet, but we call them planetoids. So there's been a debate to say, well, you found these large chunks of ice. Is it a planet? Is it not? The point is that we're developing technology, astronomical infrared technology with our telescopes, so we're starting to get a clearer picture of what possibly could be out there. And ever since the early 80s, we've had information to suggest there is a planet X.
I've got Michael Cremo on as a guest, Jason, Wednesday night. His theory, of course, is that humankind, much older than what we think, millions of years older. So if I were to ask him an ancient astronaut question, he would talk about it in terms of ancient astronauts from this planet who went to the moon and probably elsewhere. You, on the other hand, and when we talk with Eric next hour, you believe ancient astronauts are those that also came here, right?
That is correct. Now, one of the very pivotal points of why, a topic of Planet X is so interesting, at least for someone like myself, is most modern astronomers might not be aware that there's also ancient references, which we'll discuss tonight, for a planet X, meaning we're using modern science and astronomy to detect, hey, there's a planet that we're still undetected. We should we should be able to find it. It turns out there's actual astronomical sources from ancient knowledge. Just like, for instance, the Mayans had very accurate astronomical data. Recently, in the movie Apocalypto by Mel Gibson, they portrayed how the Mayans, the priest, knew that the solar solstice was going to happen, and at that exact time, they tricked the people or showcased to the people that they had the power of controlling the sun. Well, in fact, the Sumerians, even well before the Mayans, also had amazing astronomical knowledge, which now we can prove, and part of that data includes another planet within our solar system.
Well, let's get into this then, this Planet X and the possibility. What do you think it is, first of all, Jason, this Planet X?
Well, George, here's another interesting thing, again, using modern science to confirm the ancient knowledge. A lot of the new research that we're starting to do, first of all, astronomers wouldn't even accept the idea that a planet could be on a highly elliptical orbit. Now, the ancient records from the Sumerian culture speak of a planet on a very highly elliptical orbit. And they, cite all the other planets in our solar system accurately, the color of the planets, the distance of the planets. So this mention of this additional body really starts to raise questions for, does it exist? And, we only discovered Pluto in 1930 using advanced mathematics and the telescope. And even then, there were what we call perturbations on the outer planets, meaning something is pulling the planets in a certain direction, but we can't account for what that large mass could be. So there's just all types of theories abound, and one of the most recent ones, which I thought was kind of interesting, is actually two. First of all, there was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mueller over at Berkeley University, and he postulated that there's basically another failed sun, like most solar systems that have been imaged by Hubble.
A binary star system?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Have been shown, external solar systems imaged by Hubble have been shown to be binary, two suns. So then that raised the question, well, what if our solar system is binary, but our other sun, if you will, is a failed sun, what we call a brown dwarf? So Dr. Mueller at Berkeley postulated that there's another planet, which he called Nemesis, that orbits this failed sun billions of miles out. And in the process of its orbit around our failed sun, the second sun, it would dislodge comets and debris from something called the Oort cloud. It's like another asteroid belt way out on the perimeter of our solar system. And so he theorized that this Nemesis orbiting the brown dwarf, our failed sun, would dislodge comets and debris over millions of years, and this is what might have caused the asteroids or comets to strike Earth, causing the great dinosaur extinction. So there's many planetary models or hypotheses abound using modern science saying that it is possible that there could be another planet within our own solar system. So it makes it a very interesting, story, George, as we get into this, to show that the modern science is accurate. There is sufficient data to say, hey, there's another planet out there. We just haven't found it yet.
And there could be countless numbers of other planets in this solar system, Jason.
Yes, there could. Yes, there could. That's where kind of the data, from the 1980s, there was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Harrington that started to do plots using, astronomical telescopes. At the time, we had one called IRAS, the Infrared Astronomical Satellite, and he would, make star charts, plots, take images of the sky, and they would have to go through and chart which stars were already recognized and which ones could be possible new candidates. And so even since the early 80s, they've been trying to pinpoint candidates for which objects would possibly be a star that might be still within our own solar system. But it's a very hard thing to do, when we consider that, space is three-dimensional and there's a lot of space out there.
Sure. So this Planet X, Jason, could be responsible for a lot of calamities that occurred on this planet.
Yes, it could be, and for a lot of the anomalies that we see within our own solar system. When we look at the fact that, in the early 1900s, British archaeologists started doing excavations in Iraq, and in the early, we're talking like 1890 through 1910, let's say, really early 1900s, they're pulling out tablets from Iraq that show what the Sumerians called Anunnaki, basically angels, if you will. They gave the term Anunnaki, which translates into those who from heaven come to earth. And they had all these other tablets that, for instance, described the orbital patterns of the planets, distance between the planets. They talked about this additional planet, Planet X, Nibiru. And so in the early 1900s, remember, we didn't discover Pluto till 1930, all these archaeologists seeing this information about Anunnaki and living on Nibiru and Planet X, they put all of this into a big myth pile. They didn't understand. They didn't understand these references. So even to this day, we have a disconnect where archaeologists and the astronomers aren't talking, and that we see an obvious disconnect where they don't recognize any of the ancient sources as scientific data. It's mythology, meaning it's some culture that's making up a story to explain their origins or their beliefs and, their creation story. However, when we start to apply, at least focusing on this amazing data from the Sumerian culture, when we apply science, a lot of the stories start to take new shape.
Jason, the Planet X and Nibiru discussions that have been held for, ages. Do we believe if these ancient astronauts came from that planet, might they still be there now? Is the planet dead? What do you think is going on with those extraterrestrials?
Well, it's a very hard question to answer.
Sure.
Even with our sciences, again, there's kind of a line in the dirt that says very simply, modern academia is not willing to accept the idea that extraterrestrials exist now or ever have. Period. So if you can get beyond that, you can see this information being relayed by the Sumerians about this culture for coming from a Planet X. And it's very hard to prove. But again, George, when we start to use science to confirm some of these stories, it starts to raise your eyebrow a little. For instance, this idea of a Planet X, the Sumerians say that this planet is on a very highly elliptical orbit, kind of like a large egg-shaped
3,600 year.
3,600 years, correct. So if you understand that all of our planets, meaning, for instance, Earth, it goes around the sun once every 365 days. That's a solar year. Nibiru goes around our sun once every 3,600 of our years. That's one solar year for Nibiru. So a lot of the answers to, how could a planet like that goes so deep into space support life? Where's the heat source? How does this happen? Again, the science starts to answer that question. If we are a binary solar system, and as Image pointed out, by imaging other external solar systems, it saw the first planet around another star actually was on an elliptical orbit. It starts to raise the idea that, well, maybe our Planet X is orbiting so far into the depths of space that it goes towards that other second sun and loops back around towards us. Now, Nibiru is described by the Sumerian culture to be a very red, glowing planet. And they described that the Anunnaki living on this planet, they're gods, just like the Bible says, we were created in their image and after their likeness. These Anunnaki stated to the Sumerians that they came here originally to repair Nibiru's dwindling atmosphere, meaning they said that their planet, on the Anunnaki's rise to their own technological civilization, they've messed up Nibiru's atmosphere. So that was one of the reasons why they came here to Earth originally, was to mine gold, which we'll discuss further.
Absolutely. Much more to come on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, next hour, Eric Parker joins us. He is the webmaster for Zecharia Sitchin. Zechariah's website, Sitchin.com. And we'll continue then to talk more about Planet X when I come right back. Jason Martell on Coast to Coast AM. Jason, so they needed to mine gold from this planet. God knows how many tons of gold they pulled out of here and sprinkled it up in their atmosphere. And you think it worked?
That's a good question. Did it work? Will we ever meet these Anunnaki? Are they still inhabiting Nibiru or Planet X? So hopefully our modern science will find this planet, because if we do find a planet 4 to 8 times the size of Earth, not just some chunk of ice floating out there beyond Pluto, 4 to 8 times the size of Earth is the descriptions by the Sumerians. A big red glowing planet. Could even be seen by day. They have stone tablets which show, for instance, the Sumerian plowing a field. They were the first ones to have agriculture, by the way, too. Mm-hmm. You see them plowing a field, you see the sun, and they're looking up in awe at the glowing red cross in the sky. Another interesting fact, 4,000 years before Christianity, they depicted the home world of their gods as a glowing cross. And the term Nibiru actually means planet of the crossing. Another interesting little fact, George, is the Sumerians describe Planet X, Nibiru, as having this highly elliptical orbit, and it passes through currently where our asteroid belt is. Now, part of the stories of the Sumerian tales of this planet describe how, let's say around 4.5 billion, 4.7 billion years ago, Planet X, one of the moons of Planet X, whacked our primitive Earth and caused the asteroid belt, meaning it whacked our primitive Earth in such a way that it strewed out this asteroid belt, leaving our Earth to be let's call it half a planet, and moved it into the orbit it's now in today. And that's another interesting correlation where when we look at, for instance, the idea of Pangea, that Earth at one point was all one connected landmass.
Right, and it cracked or something.
Right, like the skin of an apple, only the skin has come apart, but the actual landmass was just one chunk of land, which supports the idea. I mean, if you siphon off all the water, Pangea, one chunk of mass of land, that it would have been just half a planet. Where's the other half? The Sumerians describe saying that Planet X, Nibiru, in this initial collision, or the moons of Nibiru in a collision with Earth, caused the asteroid belt. But here's an interesting little thing that a lot of the ufology people out there will find interesting. So the modern orbit of Planet X would take it through Mars and Jupiter. Between Mars and Jupiter is where the asteroid belt is. So we're talking about a 12th planet passing between Mars and Jupiter. We'll look at this. Mars, MJ for Jupiter, MJ, 12th planet, 12th. MJ12. Now, that was just an interesting correlation, I thought. But, again, there is data, which we'll talk about here from the Sumerian epic, that they were aware of 12 members in our solar system. Modern astronomical terms for Planet X simply mean X is numeric 10, but also unknown. The Planet X of the Sumerians described a solar system, our solar system, with 12 members. They counted the 9 planets we know of, our sun, 10, our moon, 11, and then Nibiru, the 12th planet of the homeworld of the Anunnaki. And that number 12 is very key, and I'm sure Eric, who I'm sure is listening, will have a lot of information to share on this too. But a lot of the things that the Sumerians left us in their lexicon of information, meaning, again, they were the first culture right out of the Stone Age, and we still use a lot of the things that they've left us in the form of math, time, medicine, science. So this idea of a solar system with 12 members, listen to how many references this is filtered down into. Again, these are all Sumerian firsts.
Well, also, there's no doubt that these Sumerians, when they came to our planet, made us in their own form. Don't you think they genetically altered something here to make us look like them?
That's exactly it. If you were to ask a Sumerian man, how do you know all this advanced math and astronomy and courts and systems of laws and judges, school, where did you learn all this? They say all that we know, we were taught by the Anunnaki, which simply means those who from heaven come to earth. And they describe a time when they lived amongst their actual living gods. Just like it says in the Bible, there were giants upon the earth. So there's a lot of interesting similarities when we start to look at this information that can cross over again to our modern use of this story. For instance, when we talk about 12 members of the solar system, 12 hours in the day, 12 hours in the night, 12 inches in a foot, 12 in a dozen. Some of the biblical references, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 disciples of Jesus, the 12 Greek Olympians. All of this is a derivative from the original Sumerian information of 12 planets in our solar system. And they were the first ones to divide the heavens into 12 parts.
Is this a code?
It almost sounds like it, like
it does.
Some Da Vinci code or something. But no, this is real, George. This is the real data of, most people would credit math, high math, and science to the Greeks and the Romans. However, they all cite Mesopotamian references, Sumer. So there is just a lot of academic information that can collaborate the legitimacy for what the Sumerians were saying. However, there's that line in the dirt again. When the Sumerians start to talk about their interaction with their living gods as real, live, daily events that took place, our archaeologists and linguists today aren't willing to accept that this was factual data. It's mythology. So we're taking the standpoint to say these are events that have really taken place. An ancient man living in clay huts and using stone tools had no idea to say, wow, that's advanced technology. That's a human being coming down in some type of anti-gravitic device, and he's an extraterrestrial. No. They simply said, wow, that must be a god, and he has some conveyance for the power of flight, so we give him wings. But we see even that connection today, George, where even today we're seeing things in our skies, and there are reports of things like alien abductions where we can't put our finger on it. So today we call them aliens, whereas then they called them gods. But maybe these are the same, and there's a crossover here.
Why did they leave this planet?
Well, that's a very esoteric topic, and I think the answer from my own personal view, I can't give you substantial data, would say that they've probably never left. And the reason for that is, the current state of world affairs on Earth right now is that if there is an advanced extraterrestrial race that has an involvement with our past, they're looking at us and seeing us killing ourselves and blowing up the planet and dwindling natural resources. What advantage would we have with the introduction of more advanced technology? So all these stories we hear of classified research or Area 51 or a cover-up, it starts to make sense that if you put into the perspective the inclusion of alien technology, what would that do to the stock market? What would it do if all of a sudden you could buy some little generator the size of a quarter and power your home forever? They're not going to let that type of stuff out. So I can understand some of the real-life applications for if there are aliens and advanced technology, which we hear on the fringes all along for over 50 years, we've been reverse engineering it. It makes sense that this stuff is so amazing and so beneficial that it has to be released in phases, slowly desensitizing the public to the idea that, even for religious purposes, society just isn't quite ready. We're getting there to accept the idea that, we're not the masters of our domain.
How do you think humans during this era, the Sumerians specifically, picked up some of the technology that the Anunnaki, of course, brought to them, but did they train them? Did they leave behind instruments, telescopes? What do you think happened then?
Well, the Sumerians, were very, very interesting in that what they have left us is a daily recordings of their daily lives and events. So there are thousands of stone tablets with a written language and cylinder seals with basically little pictures. They called them pictograms, and they would roll these seals in wet clay and leave the positive imprint of the image. So they had all these pictures and texts that would describe their daily events, where they very specifically described they lived amongst their living gods. And so, to ask where they went or, what happened to the Sumerians, or will we ever even meet these Anunnaki again, all we have is the recorded data that shows their daily lives included interaction with these beings, the Anunnaki. And the Anunnaki basically would work with very select high priests of the city and scribes, who would work with the priest. A scribe was someone who could read and write Sumerian. The Anunnaki would literally dictate to a high priest and a scribe present information, stories, data. So we have information actually, bequeathed by Anunnaki, for all intents and purposes, an extraterrestrial being, and is telling and, relaying this to Sumerians that have, copied all this information down. And, we have tablets stored in the British Museum where modern archaeologists have translated this information, and it's there as a record for us all to look at. Now, Zacharias Sitchin and a few other linguists have stepped outside the norm of accepted archaeology, instead of saying, what's the meaning of this one phrase or this one word, to say that all the information in a grander context starts to show, what if this information is truth, not just mythology? What if these are events that took place? And the reason why we take that position is all the information they've left us, which we can prove with the scientific advances we have today about astronomy or medicine or astrology, if you want to even include that as science, but the division of the heaven in 12 parts, all these things that we can understand today, we have to start to put into perspective what the Sumerians are saying about the other information we can't understand yet, which is the involvement of extraterrestrials and their very deep involvement with our past and probable future.
This 3,600-year orbit, of course, in terms of speculating if there is a Planet X, where it might be now, and how close will it come and when, Jason?
Well, that's the money question, George. Is obviously, since you and I have become aware of the idea of a Planet X, we've heard all types of predicted dates, rumors, hypotheses, if I could be so nice to say that, of when Planet X, Nibiru, would return. 2000, 2003, 2007, and now it's 2012. So I personally do not give any weight to say that Planet X is connected to 2012 or it's coming back anytime soon. And the reason why is we're talking about a planet 4 to 8 times the size of Earth. Now, the professional and the amateur astronomy community has always been very astute at finding stuff. Hale-Bopp, Shoemaker-Levy 9 that blasted into Jupiter, where NASA said it wasn't going to be anything. We had amateur astronomers recording unbelievable explosions as the 9 debris hit Jupiter. So there's a lot of things that happen that we will, if this planet is going to be coming back anytime within our lifetimes, we'll see it. And I don't think it's something that you can cover up. If it does come back, will it cause gravitational effects or a great flood like it has in the past? No one knows. The only answer I can say to that, George, is if we look at the math, the science, to say that roughly 4.7 billion years ago is when initially Planet X became a permanent member of our solar system, and if it has a 3,600-year orbit, we divide 4.7 billion by 3,600, and we're looking at over 1 million orbits Nibiru has already completed, where it would be passing, as we discussed, at MJ12, between Mars and Jupiter. So I think personally that if Planet X even were to pass by us within our lifetime, it could be on, for instance, the other side of the sun, and the Earth's on the other side of the sun.
And we can't see it.
We can't even see it. It might not have the type of effects it has in the past. We just don't know. But it is a very interesting topic to look at for what could happen in the future when we hear things like wormwood or, in the revelations of Armageddon, and we tie in the information as the Sumerians have described it of how this has caused a great flood in the past. It does raise an eyebrow of concern. But my own personal belief is that we won't find Planet X anywhere near us. And my interest, George, in this topic is not that Planet X is coming to kill us or when is it going to come and cause a great flood. It's the beings that live on this planet.
Absolutely.
And if they do exist, that's who I want to meet. And the correlation of Planet X being in the proximity to Earth doesn't always mean that that's when they visited us. The Sumerians were very astute in describing how the Anunnaki actually used Mars as well as a way station.
Why did they disappear, though, Jason? Why did they leave?
The only answer I can derive is from the research by Zacharias Sitchin at this point, which describes the Anunnaki having feuds, family clans amongst each other rising to power, and all the things in our past where we would worship the different idols of different gods. When the Anunnaki, for some reason, started to squabble amongst each other, they had a nuclear war and eventually decided to no longer inhabit Earth after the Great Flood, after the Great Deluge.
It's great to know, by the way, no matter how advanced one gets in this universe,
yes,
they'll still blow themselves up.
Yes.
Jeez.
So, it's something that over time we're going to keep an eye on, and if Planet X is something that exists, the kicker of the information is we might actually have ancestors. And, I think through our own progression of how this story would play out, desensitizing the public to, extraterrestrials, we are already on a timetable now for the inclusion of, when I was in high school, water anywhere beyond Earth was not even possible. All the planets were basically dirt. But now it's an accepted norm. Water on the moon, water on Mars, water on most of the outer planets. So hopefully within our lifetime, we'll be able to confirm, for instance, in baby steps, how about some bacteria on Mars? Some little animal that's living on a comet that we'll find. And then eventually they'll open up the idea that, wow, just as life is thriving here on Earth, even where there isn't any sunlight and the thermal vents deep in the ocean, life is probably abundant in our own solar system. But we have to come into this information as gradual steps. So, there are definitely some points of interest for people to learn about the topic of ufology. And what I've recommended is that, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So looking at the ancient sources, biblical tales, things that we accept as very sacred information, when looked at in a new light, every culture around the world, every culture, points to the heavens to say our gods came from the skies. Is heaven just floating around up there as some mythical spot we don't know? This starts to lead a new line of thinking to say, let's use modern science to confirm ancient knowledge. Besides, if Anunnaki or beings live on other worlds, somebody had to create them. And that just goes to show that there's probably a much larger encompassing view of our world, and the idea that it's not just black and white, God created us in his image and after his likeness, and that's it. I think there's a much larger picture. So it is very interesting information to look at this Sumerian data and scientifically start to confirm it doesn't go away. Every new advancement we find is only further confirming the information left by the Sumerian lexicon of information.
There are many, many theologians and religious leaders who believe that there are extraterrestrial life out there, and maybe even visitations.
Well, again, the only thing, final, wrap-up I'd start to leave for our conversation in this hour, George, is that all these biblical tales that we have, which Eric will touch on from his being raised as a Hebrew, I being raised as a Christian, have looked at these stories in the New King James Version of the New Testament
Sure.
and such, and I've always found a connection with saying, wow, this is so interesting, but how can we use our understandings of science to start to factually prove some of this data? And, the Anunnaki are the only beings throughout history that I have been able to physically have references to cite as actual beings that existed and are a part of our history.
The webmaster for www.sitchin.com, the official webmaster of the author, Zecharia Sitchin. Eric began studying the Bible in Hebrew at an early age. By 1997, he began to read and hear Mr. Sitchin, who specializes, of course, in comparative studies of the ancient world. Eric was intrigued by Sitchin's perspective that the key to humanity's past lives in the ancient Mesopotamia, particularly the written descriptions of extraterrestrial gods. And we're going to bring in Eric now, and he will be with us next hour along with Jason Martell when we take your phone calls. Eric, how have you been?
Well, it's been a rough time with the markets and everything else that's been going on.
You're a stockbroker by the daytime, aren't you?
That is correct, yes.
It is a difficult time for you guys. My gosh, are your clients like going crazy? Do they call all the time? What's going on?
Well, really, some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them are calm, some of them are not as calm. Everybody has their own personality. But overall, I would say that they're pretty good.
Well, that's another story. We'll bring you back in on another day for that, huh?
Yep.
How did you get involved with Zecharia Sitchin?
Well, it's funny. The first time I heard about Zecharia was actually on Coast to Coast AM. And he did the first hour of the show. And because of my background in studying the Bible in Hebrew, I was intrigued by what he was saying with the words like Elohim and other words that were in Hebrew and maybe mistranslated or came from older sources. And so I bought his books, and I started to read the material, and I was blown away by what kind of information it had and how scholarly it was.
His books are classics, aren't they, Eric?
Well, they're incredible. And you know what? Back when I started in 97 with his stuff, he already had written about 7 or 8 books. So there was a lot of material to cover up to that point that I had missed, because his first book was published in 1976, I believe, The 12th Planet, or 77. So then I went to see him in Sedona, Arizona, signed up to go on trips with him, and lo and behold, I started to travel with him on many group trips that went all over the world.
Good for you. How's he feeling these days?
He's okay. He's pulling through the changes that happen in life when you get older.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully we're going to be taking a trip to Italy soon, if that works out.
Well, he does have some energy then, doesn't he?
Oh, yes, he does.
Now, tell me a little bit about what you do. I know you're the webmaster, and, of course, knowing what our webmaster Lex does, of course, it's yeoman's work. He never stops. Tell me what you do with Sitchin.com.
Well, Sitchin.com is a little bit less active than I would say your Coast to Coast show is, or your website is. But for many years, we did seminars, and we advertised them there. The website, Sitchin.com, is a platform for Zecharia to produce articles and keep people up to date with things that are being discovered, let's say on Mars, or different scientific discoveries with the Human Genome Project, and other things that he wrote about many, many years ago, or things that corroborate or confirm things that he studied on his own.
Let's talk about some of his work, Eric, because I truly believe it is a classic work. When I heard about the 12th planet, probably around 96 or so as well, I just digest myself into his work, jumped right into it. When you started studying it, I mean, how did you react to it? I mean, was it fascinating to you? Did you think, oh my gosh, this is a fairy tale? What happened?
Well, it was actually like a light bulb going off in my head. and I realized that his basic premise, which is very simple, is that the ancients recorded the information that they had, and they didn't write fantasies or create fiction. They simply recorded things as the best way they could speak them or describe them in written form using old language and sometimes poetry and things like this. So it sounded fantastical to many people, but when I saw how he went backwards through the language tree and corroborated some of the mistranslations with the original meanings of words, I knew that I had found an author who really was on top of his game and his material. Because basically what we find is that when you go through the record, you could find the originating source of most words and stories. As Jason mentioned before, most of them come from the Sumerian culture as an original source for the stories and different concepts. Like Jason mentioned, 100 firsts that were noted in Sumerian tablets. What was unique about the Sumerian culture was that they left almost 1 million tablets behind.
1 million tablets?
If you count up everything. And what was different back then in the history was when one nation-state conquered another, let's say it became, became Sumerian, then Akkadian, then Babylonian, they did not wipe out the culture that they conquered. In fact, they would copy all the material. And so you have different versions of the same stories with different character names, and each one's in a different language or a different style, and you can follow and go back to where the source is. That's why the material is so compelling, because it's overwhelming type 1 data or type 1 evidence. And type 1 is something physical, like a tablet that's in clay or stone that has not been changed since the time that the scribe chiseled it.
I was going to say, describe for us, if you would, Eric, these tablets, what they look like, how they were made.
Well, very simple. By the way, if anybody has access to a website, on my site, ericparker.com, I have on the website called webradio.htm is different
And that's
slides.
Eric with a K.
That's
right?
correct. Yeah, Eric Parker with a K and all Ks. Basically, you're talking about tablets that are the size of pieces of paper, 8.5 by 11, up to the sizes of, pillow sizes of tablets that they carved stories on, and they carved transactions on, like I sold you some sheep, and, we did some land transaction. Most of them are these kind of administrative tablets. But remember, back then, if the king wanted to get out his edict and tell a story or give some rules or laws, it had to be copied throughout the kingdom. So he would put on these tablets whatever he wants.
Made out of what?
Either clay or stone.
Okay.
And so they will survive in their original form until they're broken or smashed or, cave in some cases, destroys it. It's not like a piece of paper, like our books. If you just sit around with the books for a few hundred years and you try to look at them, they will fall apart.
Fall apart, sure.
So what you've got is the original form that the scribe wrote, and it's chiseled, and with the clay, they used the stylus while the clay was wet. In the case of stone, they would chisel it, with a hammer and the chisel. And you have the most amazing stories that we are all familiar with today, but we're familiar with them from the Bible.
Okay, so these stories were primarily depictions of little sketches. Is that what they would do?
Well, no, actually, these are extremely long, detailed stories. For example, in the Epic of Creation, which is 7 tablets, the 7 tablets of creation, it has a lot more information of why humans were created than what you see in the Bible. And the stories the Bible borrows from these older Sumerian sources, it actually edits them down to smaller versions.
But they don't have texts. They don't have words, so it's pictures, right?
Well, no, they have both. They depict. They have many depictions which appear in cylinder seals and just carved on stelas, which is a giant stone with a carving. And then you have a story which matches the picture. So in some cases, you get a cylinder seal showing the first mother goddess holding up the first human male, and she's saying, my God, my hands have made it. And then you also have a text which describes this event and how it came to be. So you have corroborating evidence, picture form, and this text in the same culture describing the same thing.
If 5 people, Eric, looked at the texts and in the pictures, would they come up with 5 different stories or interpretations?
No, I think they would all come up with the same story, but they would have a different reasoning behind the story's originating source. For example, the flood story, now I know of the Noah flood character by 4 different names: Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, and Ziasudra, and Noah. Those are all 4 names of the same character who was told by his God to get ready for a flood and build an ark, and then he escapes the flood with his family. It's the same story. The names change through the different cultural changes, and the story will always be the same, the theme of the story. But each culture kind of made the story themselves when changed very small things. For example, the Bible has the dove catching the little branch from the tree. In the Sumerian story, the raven gets the branch. And the water is not 150 days, and they're not on the ark for that long of a time. It's something like 7 days. So different changes occur, but the stories are basically the same themes. But there's a lot more details in the Sumerian story. It describes the gods looking down upon the humans who have died in the flood and lamenting and feeling upset and crying for their humans who have been killed.
Okay, now, of course, the big story, Eric, and that is the Anunnaki and Nibiru and the visitation. Describe to me what these tablets look like and how we interpret that, how Zechariah did specifically.
Well, what Zechariah did was very simple. When all the scholars were looking at these and saying, well, these are just fantasy stories made up, he said, wait a second, there's more information in here that can't be just by chance. There must be some knowledgeable source or originating person, or God in this case, because that's what they said in the stories, that it was their God who gave them this information, because more information is shown. There's a tablet that divides numbers of 12,960,000, and it divides that number down to the smallest part possible. Now, why does anybody 6,000 years ago need to be dealing with numbers in the 12 millions? I don't know. But besides that kind of information where they went through detailed tablets of stuff that they should not have known about, what you get is a bigger picture of knowledge that's being passed down. Now, I'm not saying that everybody of the culture knew this information. We know at least two people knew it. The God who then transcribed it to a scribe, and the scribe who wrote it. We don't know if everybody in the culture knew this stuff.
All right. You know, the Abydos tablets, you've seen those, right, from Egypt?
Yes, the glyphs that look like
helicopters and spaceships and everything else. Mm-hmm. Do some of the Sumerian texts and tablets have those kinds of depictions on them?
Oh, yes. There's many ancient depictions of sky vehicles, and also the characters. See, what you get is, for example, Inanna Ishtar. You get her being described as a flyer. You get the description of what she puts on, her gear, and then you get a life-size statue of what she looked like with all her gear on, with a helmet and breathing apparatus. And so you have a triple in this case with Inanna Ishtar. The description and the flying and the vehicle, all of this. Plus there was these things called the Me. The Me was basically like, we would think of it as a microchip, where one god stole them in their hand, and they had instruction sets for, well, let's call it the ship or the mission control, and then they had to go chase her to get it, and she shut down operations. I mean, there's stories like that too. So there's a lot of advanced technology being discussed, but nobody would think of it as technology. The scholars would think of it as just fantasy, until Zechariah came around and he said, wait a second, this is a lot more. They shouldn't have known about this.
He looked at it and said, we've been visited.
Correct. What's funny is that's what every person believes who believes in the Bible. Because remember, God of the Bible is not a human, and it was not born on Earth. By definition, that would be an extraterrestrial.
If he's physical, I guess.
Correct. But if he's not physical, then he's even more of an ET.
Sure.
Because he doesn't even have a physical form. So in Christianity's belief, he would have to produce a child to manifest his essence on Earth. Well, the story of a character who's half human, half God is a very old story. That's one of the oldest stories that existed.
Now, if somebody looked at these tablets, though, Eric, would they also possibly misinterpret them as some fancy, some artwork?
Well, you can always misinterpret something and call it what it. You can say, "Hey, it's not what my eyes think it is." A person can have a block because this kind of information can destroy the foundational belief system that they have, and maybe convince them that everything they've ever been taught has been incorrect. So then they could see something and then not see what other people see. A person who's open-minded could say, "Hey, it's possible. Angels are coming down, interacting with humans, giving them commands. Wars are being started. It's obviously a story of humans being having involvements with ETs, Some people say God and angels. You see, you can label it anything you want, but the story remains. If you believe these stories in the Bible, well, then you have to believe the source material of the Bible as well.
See, I'm a believer in the Greek gods, that they were extraterrestrials as well.
Well, and the Greek gods are, George, just borrowed from Phoenician sources, because the Phoenicians came and taught the Greeks, and the Phoenicians were the people where our language of Hebrew comes from. The description of the letters, the sounds of the letters, and the names of the letters are Phoenician names. And they copied the stories that were the Mesopotamian stories that existed, by the way, for thousands of years before it got to the Greeks.
So the Greek mythology could be just based on ancient stories.
Oh, in fact, it is. A lot of it has consistencies with stories that we're familiar with. You've got the brothers fighting. You've got the son who was killed or, reborn, avenging the death. You've got Zeus and lightning bolts. I mean, you have a lot of these things that are consistent with the Sumerian stuff and other things that come later in other cultures.
All right, give me your take based on Zechariah's work. What happened? Let's go all the way back.
Okay, if you think about the origin of our solar system happening 4.5 billion years ago, and then you consider that if life started on another planet in our solar system before us, it happened as fast as a snap. One snap of your finger is how much more these other people from a different planet became advanced and had the ability to have space travel. So they only beat us by a few 100,000 years. So he thinks about 450,000 years ago, these beings came here from the planet Nibiru, and they were advanced enough to travel through space, but only through the solar system, not from a different solar system. We're talking about neighbors within our system. They came here because their planet was losing heat, and they came to get raw materials. For a couple 100,000 years, they were mining and getting the materials they needed, and then there was a revolt. And the revolt is clearly described, and they complained, and so the leaders decided to make a primitive man. To make a primitive worker. And then they created humans, who they called Lulu Amelo, which was a mixed-up being. The word Lulu still existing in our current language to describe somebody who's mixed up. And we were created just like them, and the first model man was named Adamu, which is Adam.
Right, good point.
And the stories of these creations are consistent with the biblical stories of blood and clay and flesh and the God giving a spirit or a soul into the being. So basically, humans were created to help the gods do work, which is what the Bible says. But the Bible says it was to work in the garden. Well, the Sumerians say it was to work in the mines and other sources for the gods. And then there's descriptions of what happened during these times. And then what happens is it comes down to natural disasters, where after the Great Flood, the Anunnaki and the leadership of these beings decide that they need humans as partners, not just to dominate them, not slaves, but they need priest kings and other people to help them manage the growing population of humans. Apparently, we grew really quickly, and Enlil, whose brother was Enki, Enlil did not really like humans as much, and Enki favored humans and had many children from human females, by the way, which is a reason why the flood was given, which was to destroy the mixed-up beings who God did not like, which were hybrids. And so you have a situation where they decided to have humans be their partners. But family squabbles led to priest kings and wars. They went to war in the name of this god. They went to war in the name of this god. Eventually, most of them left. The reasons they left actually are very interesting. There is evidence from some tablets that they left because they were becoming older. Grandchildren were becoming older than their grandparents. Because on Nibiru, whose average orbit is 3,600 years, their time span of life, if they lived 100 orbits, they would live 360,000 of our years. But when they came to Earth, we zip around the sun so fast, they became subjected to a faster time frame, and they became really old. So there was a time where a lot of them left. The last one or two times Nibiru was nearby. Now, these beings were not so advanced that they could just jump off of Earth and get to Nibiru at any moment. They used Mars as a station in between. They didn't necessarily come to Earth when Nibiru was closest to us. They would have to jump off early, and then Nibiru would come around, and they would have to get back on again in the opposite way. And we know this from a visit that Anu and Antu, which was the chief king and his wife, visited Earth at the time frame of the beginning of the Hebrew calendar, 5,764 years ago, approximately. So we have kind of an indication of time of when Nibiru was closest, or at least nearby enough to visit from a couple orbits ago.
Do you think many stories in the Bible, the First Testament at least, the Old Testament, reflected information that the Sumerians had, Eric?
Oh, yeah, there's actually no doubt about it. Some of the stuff that I lecture on and Zechariah lectures on, we can see direct copies from stories that were from much older sources. And in some cases, because nobody knew about this for so many thousands of years, they got away with it. It was plagiarism. It was, but it wasn't.
You couldn't sue then, though, could you?
No, but it wasn't done with malice. It was just that these were stories that were known for thousands of years.
They wanted to pass them on.
And they did, and each culture passed them on. And when you get to, let's say, the Moses era, where Alexandria, Egypt, has a library, and all the library has is the knowledge of the whole world. Okay, and everything that existed up to the time is stored there. So Moses, let's say, was brought up as a prince of Egypt. He would have had access to all this knowledge. Well, what's funny is a lot of the Moses stories are borrowed. His birth story is the same as Sargon the Great, king of Acadia.
Good point. You're right.
You know, born in secret, put into a basket, left to float in the river, found by a noble person and raised to be the king, and in Moses' case, the king of the Hebrews. Moses turning the Nile River to blood. That was done by Inanna Ishtar thousands of years earlier. There's just so many details of stories. Now, some of the stories are unique, like Moses taking his followers out and the plagues and all this, but the plagues themselves are not all originals. And so you have to question then which is original stories and which is not. But you can see the source of so many of them. The Tower of Babel, the flood, the creation of humans.
Why weren't we taught this years ago, Eric?
Well, okay, two possible reasons. One, to maintain the ideology or the dogma that we have the answer, we know what happened to our history, and two, we didn't know that there was an alternative view until these tablets were found. Because you have to study outside of your comfort level into areas of archaeology. And these tablets, by the way, are all over different museums and colleges and universities around the world. The French dug some up, the British did, Yale did, Philadelphia University did, so they're all over. Well, it only comes to the 20th century, the 1940s and 50s, when you have Samuel Noah Kramer, who's the preeminent Sumerologist of his era, combining and finding out and realizing, hey, these stories, these tablets are the same. Some of them were broken. He had to translate them. It could take a month to translate one tablet. And like I said, they found a million tablets, and most of them are administrative. But the ones that have to do with the history, mythology, or the stories of the gods, they weren't always translated so quickly. Most of the archaeologists and historians were doing Assyrian or Babylonian. But when they found the older tablets, it took one specific person to realize this, and then that became his specialty. And it took, like Jason said regarding dissemination, it took 40, 50 years to disseminate where we can talk about it now, having a big foundation of evidence behind what I'm saying. I have books and books of shelves of these tablets translated, some from the New York Metropolitan Museum in New York. 3 books that are 2 inches thick, each one of them has everything in their library translated. Well, unless you read it all yourself, you don't necessarily know what's in there. But lately, I think the paradigm is changing now, and it's very obvious to see the progression of language and the progression of stories is very easy to document now.
The technology that they had, and let's assume they fought here. In India, I was talking to Michael Cremo about this. He's our guest Wednesday night. In India, they describe what could be a nuclear fight between people on this planet. Might that have been the Anunnaki?
Oh, yes, it's quite possible. The Anunnaki in the Sumerian stories are the only beings that are here on Earth. That doesn't mean, or the only alien beings that are here on Earth. That doesn't mean that is the case. There could have been other groups here. But the stories of nuclear fighting or fighting to have big explosions is something familiar to people who know the Bible, because Sodom and Gomorrah were 2 cities that were destroyed by balls of fire or hail and brimstone.
Sure.
So we have evidence of this, and there's evidence on the ground in the area where Sodom and Gomorrah is thought to be of black, burnt-out type stones and rocks, and there's no lava or volcano activity in the area. And there's nothing to account for this type of change in the geology of those areas, except we have a story which happens to match the timing and the dating of when Abraham left, and everything seems to connect perfectly to 2025 BC. And then you have the lament tablets, which are talking about, the civilization was destroyed, but the buildings were not destroyed, but the people were killed. And there was a death cloud that came and went over the cities and destroyed things. So it would seem to indicate the kind of thing that we would call a nuclear disaster. It may have been a different technology, but it's the same effect. Buildings are not destroyed, but the people are killed. So this kind of evidence doesn't only exist in India, it also exists in Mesopotamia.
Well, that may be absolutely true. So are there other people like Zechariah out there who have investigated these Sumerian texts?
Well, sure. Right now there's many of them, and there's many authors now who talk about it. I work with Zechariah, so I tend to stick mostly with his stuff, but I buy a lot of corroborating type of books or evidence of scholars. Mostly, though, we look at stuff that's even older than Zechariah's, because the problem now is that anybody who writes after will use Zechariah as a source. So when I studied Zechariah's material, I actually studied his sources. So I went back to Samuel Noah Kramer and Stephen Langdon and old professors who originally dug up the tablets. And I wanted to see what they thought and what they translated. And the more I went back and the more I saw, the more I realized Zechariah's way of looking at it was correct.
Well, what did some of the original people say?
Well, I have a book here, just a simple little book, which talks about the calendars. And so the calendar has all the holidays that we're all familiar with from the Bible, talks about the months and the names of the months and things that the king should do, and he shouldn't start a war on this day, and he should stay close to his castle on that day. Well, it turns out that a lot of these days, December 25th, or in the Hebrew calendar, Yom Kippur, or the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, all of these holidays have been holidays for thousands of years. They've always been important days. And just because another historical event happened on a day doesn't mean that something didn't happen prior to that. So that's what happens when you go back in time and you're looking at the archaeological record. What you're seeing is there's nothing new. It's all being copied from something more.
Is there anything in those tablets that you don't agree with in terms of what the Zechariah has done? Or do you believe what his interpretations are, totally?
Well, I have we do have a disagreement whether the Yahweh character of the Bible was a real physical being, and he consumed food and ate like the Anunnaki gods were known to do. And by the way, the Anunnaki gods would only eat from gold bowls or gold cups.
Oh, really? Why?
Yep. Well, they were picky.
Fussy, yeah.
And it may have been their biology. We don't know. It could have been that they were allergic to other things. We don't know how pure they were necessarily and what kind, how pure they wanted their food and drink. Also, they would not eat meat before midday. And that's a funny thing, that Jews only would eat like salmon or fish in the morning, but never meat. Like it's a popular thing to have sausage or bacon in the morning, but for some reason the Hebrew people won't do that. And the Anunnaki didn't have meat before midday. So when Moses was in the desert with Yahweh's cloud over him and they were traveling with his tabernacle, they were giving sacrifices. So I always thought, well, maybe the sacrifices were meant to give food and nourishment to the god. So that's kind of a disagreement that we're not, there's no evidence that Yahweh actually consumed, but yet the story after the flood is that he smelled the pleasing aroma of the sacrifice that Noah was giving. Now, I know that the story is actually talking about the other Anunnaki gods who did consume. So the question is, what characteristics were Yahweh only, and what characteristics were picked up from the prior gods' descriptions?
Wouldn't you have liked to have lived during that era, Eric? My gosh.
Well, to have seen it firsthand, yeah. I would have loved to see some of the miracles and some of these events that happened. But you know what's funny, George? Even though these Israelites witnessed the 10 plagues and everything that the God did for them,
sure,
they still didn't believe. They still had a problem with their faith. They seem to have always had a problem with their faith, even though they were witnessing the stuff firsthand. And I always found that very interesting.
Would these beings, obviously, they came down in craft?
Yes, they were physical craft, chemical or fuel-based, and we know this because their landing sites and their launching sites are gigantic stone platforms throughout the ancient world. Baalbek, Lebanon is one of them, an example of gigantic stones. And, I've been to Malta, I've been to the pyramids, I just don't know why ancient man has to work with such gigantic stone blocks. What's the point?
What if they were giants here?
Well, see, that's funny. That is very possible because the actual word for giant in Hebrew is Anakim.
Oh, really?
Which is Anak. Now, you have the Anunnaki and you have Enki. And if you think of the word without vowels, because back then they didn't have vowels as letters, they used little dots and lines for vowels, you have basically A-N-K is Anaki, giant, Enki, or Anunnaki.
Does the word Nephilim ever come up in the Sumerian tablets?
Not that word, because that's from an Akkadian root. But the word Nephilim means two different things. It means from the root Nephal, those who've come down, okay, which is the same meaning as Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. So you have Anakim, the sound of Anunnaki, meaning the word giant in Hebrew. Then you have the translation of what Anunnaki means becoming the same meaning as the word Nephilim. This is how we can translate and go back in time through the language. One word in Hebrew keeps the meaning, and one word in Hebrew keeps the sound of the original word. And it becomes two different words. I can give you another example, like the word Adam. Adam is man. But Adam is also a compound word. It means dam, blood. Adom is red. Adama means clay, and it's red clay. And so Adam's name encompasses red, earth, clay, and blood.
That is something.
And so that's why you get
good interpretation.
So Hebrew picks up not just the sound of the words, but the meanings of several words and puts them into a single root. And then you have the root then puts things on the end of it or in the front of it.
What about the misinterpretations? I bet that's out there too, isn't it?
Well, yeah. The biggest misinterpretation, George, is the first time the word God was used in the ancient Sumerian stories and didn't even mean God. The original word for God was Dingir, and Din is the word righteous or holy, like Eden, right? The Garden of Eden. Well, E means house, and Din means justice or righteous, so it's really a house of judgment, like where the king or the court would be. But Dingir, it means righteous ones of the fiery, flashy object thing that goes to the sky. So they were describing astronauts or people who flew in vehicles, and guess what? Dingir got translated into Akkadian to mean the word God. Originally, it meant righteous ones of the sky chamber or the flashy, fiery object thing. So the first mistranslation created the word God.
The first mistranslation created the word God, but then it got carried through.
That's correct.
Why?
Well, because the word worked. In other words, when Akkadian translated from the original Sumerian Dingir into Elu or El, Ilani, and Aluti, which are the Hebrew or Semitic forms of the word God, it meant lofty ones. It didn't even mean God. It meant lofty ones, those who are above us, higher, flying, more spiritual, more knowledgeable, more technologically advanced, the givers of knowledge. But we later translate it to be God. If you could take out, and by the way, in English, when you see the Bible, it says the Lord this and God that. In Hebrew, each of these words doesn't mean that. They use the name of Yahweh. They use the word Elohim. They use different words which become Lord or God in English. So that's why learning the Bible in Hebrew gives you a very different perspective. And then going back even farther gives you another perspective. That's quite incredible.
So the Anunnaki pack up and leave. They go back to their planet. Why? Why simply give up and take off? Why not stay?
Well, there is evidence that some stayed behind, and there's evidence that some died on Earth. Like there's a royal tomb and cemetery in Ur, where they found a female Anunnaki, and her husband. And the measurements of this body is very unusual, very large heads and very large boned. So there is some physical evidence that some of them stayed behind. Some of them stayed behind because they didn't mind getting old. They liked their lives. But most of them felt they were higher above than humans. Humans were a creation of theirs. And so it's like living among the animals from their point of view. I wouldn't say they were stuck up, but I would say that they felt that they were a higher level being and they didn't want to be stuck with low-level creations because humans became so many humans were created and born that we overwhelmed them.
I always have wondered if they were banned from their own planet and sent here?
Well, in the beginning, it seems that the first few that came, that was the case with Alalu. That's what the stories say. He was trying to escape Anu when they had a fight for supremacy. But later on, when they discovered that there was resources here, they came willingly. Of course, the story that covers the Igigi, and the Igigi are the astronauts that are not the ruling class. These guys were tired of their job. These are the ones that revolted and complained that they were doing too much work, and they were the ones who came down and had a lot of interactions with humans. So you get a little bit of everything. You get one side of the clan, the Enki clan, liking humans, and you get the Enlil clan not liking humans. And it's kind of like the Bible, where the flood is given to destroy humans, but then Noah's told to build an ark so humanity is saved. Then you have the Tower of Babel, which God didn't like, but then he split up the languages. So you get this split personality where one side likes humans and one side punishes them, and one side gives them another chance, and it goes back and forth.
Well, you've done some great work here, Eric, and tell me anything new coming up with your work with Zechariah?
Well, he's always putting up something new. Right now, we're going to be putting up something about Mars very soon. And
really? What's happening there?
Just some interesting, what they call blueberries, is a iron oxide material that's on Mars, shown by those little robots.
Right.
Which
the rovers.
The rovers, which proves, first of all, that water was involved in forming this geology. So it may not be absolutely new to to people that follow this very closely.
Hoagland might know about it already, huh?
Also, people who study it know that. Also, Zechariah's new book, The Journeys to the Mythical Past, talked about pathways in the Great Pyramid that were previously unknown before, that he was involved in, that he never released before, where somebody from one of our groups actually walked inside one of these tunnels. And this guy is big. He's 6'2" or so, and he got in as far as he could. And there's some pictures of that in Zechariah's recent book. What's happening is he's now releasing all of his little tidbits of information that he gathered, through his travels, and finally coming out with all the stuff that he may not have talked about before.
Well, Eric, the subject of the visitation to me is one of the greatest. I had an astronomer try to look for that 3,600-year elliptical orbit of Nibiru, and he wasn't able to find it. But Zechariah, in his book, The 12th Planet, kind of pinpoints it pretty well, I think.
He pinpoints it from that 1976 and 77 time frame. One, because there was an observation in a tablet around 555 BC where they observed it in a certain constellation, and so he knew from that time frame it was there. Then Zechariah went to meet Professor Harrington at the U.S. Naval Observatory, who was doing work on the perturbations of, Neptune and Uranus, and projected that there was another planet out there. And if you account for the brown dwarf, you then have, another reason to look in a certain area, and he thought that he pinpointed it. Unfortunately, Dr. Harrington died, but his research, at least what he wrote, was left behind, of course. And, there have been multiple sightings throughout the historical record of this, 10th planet or Nibiru coming through our solar system, coming close to Earth.
Sure.
So it's not an historical fact until our civilization sees it live. But as far as the historical record is concerned, it's an historical fact.
Hey, both of you, Jason and Eric, thanks for being on the program, my friends.
Thank you, George. We'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Keep in touch.
Take care.
And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Webmaster Lex Lowenhood has posted several pictures that Doug has supplied us. Go take a look at them. They're up there at coasttocoastam.com. By day, Doug has worked in the field of information technology as a freelance website developer. By night, he moonlights as a travel writer focusing on mysterious and exotic travel destinations around the world. Doug's book, Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age, has just come out with an updated version, reveals his hidden passion as an advanced theoretical theologian focusing on retranslating the Bible in light of the modern scientific advancements. Doug, welcome to the program.
Hey, George, thanks so much for having me back on again.
We just had that story where NASA is telling us that over the next 100 years, we don't have to worry about asteroids. What bothers me about that, Doug, is a lot of the asteroids that they tell us about have already passed the planet. They catch them later, not before.
Right. The asteroids are so dark, they actually have like a dark organic material on them, which makes them very difficult to spot using normal telescopes.
Absolutely. How have you been?
I'm fine. I'm doing well. I just started my own publishing company, and I'm starting to publish independent books, including republishing my book on Planet X. And I just started working on my book on the giants again after several years focusing on my web development career. Now I finally have some time to focus back on doing books and the kind of stuff that the coast-to-coast audience likes to read.
So that means we're going to get you back again, right?
Hopefully at the end of this year.
Super. Good for you. Planet X, what got you interested in that? Of course, we know the work of the great and late Zecharia Sitchin.
My original interest in Planet X, so I was looking for signs of Jesus' second coming back when I was in college. And I stumbled upon this the passage in Matthew 24. It's called the Olivet Discourse. And Jesus was basically describing to his disciples what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age. And in Matthew 24:30, he described this mysterious sign, which was so terrifying that the entire earth would be terrified by its appearance. And so I was trying to figure out, well, there's all kinds of false prophets and false starts and bad prognostication that's been going on for centuries. So I figured that this heavenly sign would be a sure sign that would tell us for sure if Jesus was actually coming back. And so I underwent, while I was at college, I was going to Southern Illinois University, and he had a very nice library there.
In Carbondale, right?
Yeah, in Carbondale, right. I got a degree in civil.
One of my granddaughters is going there working on her pilot's license.
Oh, yeah, they have a good school down there.
Yeah.
A roommate of mine actually got his license there as well. It's a very good school. I really enjoyed my time there. It was actually, the great thing about it is actually you could go out to the outskirts of the town at that time and actually see the stars really, really well. You can actually see the Milky Way. It was still fairly rural back then. And so I had some really nice experiences doing stargazing. And it also really helped out with my understanding of astronomy while I was looking for this heavenly sign. And I studied the subject, and for some reason I decided that the Star of Bethlehem was kind of the same object. And so I said, well, Jesus was preceded by a heavenly sign in Matthew 2 called the Star of Bethlehem. Maybe this is the same or a similar sign returning again in the end times. And so I kind of looked at the Star of Bethlehem and the various theories regarding that. And there was a number of different theories, but they really boiled down to three different ideas. It was either a supernova, a comet, or a conjunction of planets. And even though all three of those have their strengths and weaknesses, none of them really fit very well because supernovas only last for a few days. And the Magi, who were basically Persian astrologers and wise men, would have to travel probably several weeks, if not months, from Persia to Israel to actually be able to witness the Christ child, give them the gifts. And so that didn't really work out. Also, comets are relatively transitory. They only last a few weeks, and they're usually often not very bright, and they're relatively common. I mean, you have a few dozen significant comets every century, so there was nothing really unique about a comet. And also the conjunction of planets, which is probably the most popular one. That is probably, there were no significant conjunctions around that time, and the conjunctions typically only last a few days, once again not long enough for the Magi to follow it all that way from Persia down to Israel. So I wasn't really satisfied with all the answers they were giving me, so I kept looking, and I kind of broadened my search to fringe theory and outside of the Christian community, and I came across this book by Zecharia Sitchin called The 12th Planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so in his theory there was that there was a planet in our solar system which came and went over thousands of years. His orbital period was 3,600 years, based on the Sumerian Shar measure. And he believes that Planet X comes into our solar system every once in a while as far as the asteroid belt, where it originally conflicted with the Earth, which had actually formed not where it is presently, but actually in the asteroid belt. And this conflict with Planet X, which was a new planet that came into our solar system from outside, possibly captured from another solar system or maybe a rogue planet. And what happened was one of its satellites collided with Earth, and another of its satellites pushed Earth to its present location closer to the sun, where it could be warmer and it could sustain life, because where it was in the asteroid belt originally was too far away from the sun to support life. There just wasn't enough sun. It was much farther away than Earth in its present location. And so I felt that was an interesting theory, and it also answered a lot of questions. How can you have a bright star or planet that comes and goes over thousands of years, and maybe every couple of thousand years returns to herald a new age of mankind. And I thought, you know what, that fits the Star of Bethlehem idea perfectly, because if the Star of Bethlehem was an appearance of Planet X, so Planet X would come back sometime in the future as a sign of the Son of Man. So I've been pursuing that idea, and I found that it fits not only the end times and the nativity, but also the creation. Answers a lot of questions about all three of them.
And it does wreak havoc when it comes around, doesn't it?
Well, what happens is, even though it doesn't actually come too close to Earth, its perihelion, or the closest approach to the sun, is actually in the asteroid belt, which is pretty far away from us, so we're relatively safe. But it becomes very prominent and very bright when it enters into the inner solar system, because it has not one but three comet-like tails which form when it passes by Jupiter, and the solar wind begins to ignite the water that has circulating around it. And basically, the theory is it has a huge amount of dust and rocks and water and gases in orbit around it that was left over from that original conflict with Earth, and it remained in orbit around Planet X. So not only is that how it forms its comet-like wings and tail, as you can see in the Sumerian images of it, where it's like this cross-like object which has these huge wings and a tail. It also is screened by all this dust and rocks, so we cannot see it at all until it gets close enough to the sun so that the wings and tail are sublimated due to the solar wind, and we can see it. Not only can we see it, it's extremely bright and very, very obvious. But the real threat from Planet X is not Planet X itself, even though it's possible that it could have its orbit altered sufficiently so that it could come close to Earth again through interaction with the outer planets, because it goes in and out of our solar system and passes by the outer planets and sometimes interacts with them gravitationally and sometimes catastrophically. But the greater threat is actually the huge amount of asteroidal material, large and small rocks, it carries with it in its orbit. And when it comes into the inner solar system, a lot of this stuff gets scattered around. And Earth, every 2,000 years or so, appears to experience a massive impact just from huge asteroids that strike all over the Earth. The most recent time that happened was actually around the time of Abraham in 2000 BC, which probably explains not only the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah by fire from heaven, but also there's an impact crater from a large asteroid in southeastern Iraq that was discovered back in the 1980s, which explains why the capital city of Ur, or capital city of Sumer, named Ur, was actually destroyed by, in their mythology, they feel that the gods had thrown down fire from heaven to destroy Ur. We now know that was actually an asteroid that struck near there in the marshlands near the Gulf. And as a result, all of Ur and many of its surrounding regions were totally destroyed by what we now know as an impact crater from an asteroid, or impact from an asteroid.
It's amazing, Doug, how many celestial events have been turned into biblical events.
Well, the Bible actually records a lot of them, but a lot of them we don't have recordings of. There may have been many asteroids striking and destroying many civilizations over time. We just don't know about it because they weren't recorded. All we see are the craters, and most of the craters we probably haven't even discovered.
I mean, the Great Flood could have been a tsunami, right?
The Great Flood was probably a combination of asteroidal impacts and tectonic shifts due to possibly asteroids striking contrary to the Earth's rotation and actually dislodging the crust temporarily, so that the Earth actually rotated backwards or stayed still for a period of time. That would have caused massive tsunamis, because that would have caused the waters to slosh over the Earth as they continued to move while the Earth's crust slowed down, stopped, or possibly even reversed. And so you would have a great flood because there's going to be huge walls of water traveling hundreds of miles in it and basically covering everything.
Doug, in Zecharia Sitchin's book, 12th Planet, not only does he, as you mentioned, talk about Planet X, but he talks about the fact that it's inhabited by a race called the Anunnaki. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm actually leaning more and more towards the idea that there was a kind of a Star Wars type of conflict in space in ancient times. It's a question of whether or not they're extraterrestrial biological entities or spirits who have created bodies for themselves to inhabit while living in the material world. It's really a question of worldview. I mean, you have ancient aliens, which proposes the ancient astronaut theory, which is possible. I myself, as a Christian, believe more in the idea of spirits creating bodies for themselves so they can interact with the material world. But in either case, there was a schism, a civil war between two factions, one which was greater and one which was lesser, which is described in the Bible as kind of the a war in heaven, and specifically in Revelation 12, where the leader of this rebellion, who was named Satan or the dragon, was thrown down from heaven to earth, and all of his forces, those angels who rebelled against the high God, were thrown down with him. Now, it doesn't really say where this happened or where he fell from, but it is entirely possible that the battle was for the control of Planet X, and Satan and his forces lost, and they ended up being thrown down to earth, where they remain to this day.
It is exciting, though, and the possibilities are just amazing, aren't they?
We really could be dealing with a Star Wars type scenario. It's really quite breathtaking, the potential for what these discoveries are bringing us.
Doug, tell us about your work with giants.
Well, back about 2003, when I was still publishing MysteriousWorld.com, I was actually inspired by Steve Quayle and his writings, The Giants.
Uh-huh.
I was looking for ideas for articles for Mysterious World. And so I ended up writing a series of articles about the giants, based partly in his work and out of some other things, and my own study of the giants and the fallen angels, which were interlinked in the Old Testament, specifically in Genesis 6, but in other places too. I'd actually had a master's degree in Old Testament biblical studies, and I'd studied much of what is called the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament written by Moses, and they were kind of a cohesive unit. And he talked a lot about the battle with the giants and this thing called the iniquity of the Amorites, and how fallen angels were apparently coming down and intermarrying with women and creating these giants. And so this was not only interesting personally, it was actually part of my faith journey. How is this possible? What does this mean? And so I determined that most likely what it was is these rebel angels we were talking about previously had come down to earth and intermarried with the women that God had created, and were creating a race of giants in an attempt to, which would be biologically, genetically enhanced humans, in an attempt to retake heaven, whether that is Planet X or some other location in some other dimension. And so the theory is that, and this is part of my book on giants, is, not only what were the giants, but why did they exist? What was the purpose of them? And part of the reason the giants were created was to help Satan and his fallen angels retake heaven away from God and basically rule the universe. So I'm exploring that idea in the book. So it makes a lot of sense, because the giants were given what we understand as high technology. Adam and Eve actually, in my opinion, when they were tempted in the garden, they were actually given a knowledge of what we understand as the arts and sciences and technology. They were educated. They were no longer ignorant. They were educated, probably extremely brilliant, genius level beyond Einstein. And so the theory is that Satan was actually tricking them into creating their own, technological prison, where he would teach them how to build this technology, but then he would use that technology to control them. Maybe sounds a little bit familiar. And so the idea is that it's a technological bluff, as Jacques Ellul would put it, one of the people I studied in grad school, is that the technology that enables us will eventually allow Satan to control us. That's the real danger. The advantage of technology can also be a disadvantage, because it can also be used to control you by sinister third parties who do not have our best interests in mind. And so that's always been a struggle between a technological approach and the reliance on God for your provision. Since the garden, a man has struggled between, I want to be technologically advanced and be able to do lots of great stuff, or I just want to keep life simple, live in the wilderness and, farm or something. There was the classic clash between Cain and Abel. And Cain, who learned how to use weapons. Brothers, right? Brothers, yeah, 2 brothers with 2 different ways of doing things. Cain turned on his brother because he was jealous, because God preferred his offering, and he killed him with technology, a weapon he had created. And so that was the beginning of the schism between the 2 great lines, the line of Cain and the line of Seth, with Seth being the next son who replaced Abel. And so that was a conflict between those 2, and you see this in the Bible. You have the line of Cain talked about in Genesis 4, and then you see the line of Seth following through to Abraham, and there was a constant struggle between the 2, all the way up to the flood, where the giants, who are descendants of Cain, actually defeated the descendants of Seth through a combination of war, attrition. They outbred, they outcompeted, and they stole all the resources. Wherever giants went, they would basically take all the resources and not replenish anything. They were completely non-green, whereas the sons of Seth were highly green and were meant to keep in balance with nature. Satan had designed the giants to conquer and control and take control of nature, and there was no concern about the replenishment of nature. It was all about conquest. And so eventually the giants had built their weapons, and possibly even what we would call high technology weapons, even by modern standards, because the fallen angels probably could have taught them practically anything. What happened is there were wars that are so devastating they actually polluted the earth. And so in order to get rid of the giants and everything they'd done and all the pollutions they had created, and the technology that was basically leading to the enslavement and destruction of the human race, God sent the flood and saved 8 souls out of that, the 8 souls from the descendants of Seth, according to the Bible, and put them in the ark, and they survived on to the next world, whereas the previous world was destroyed by the flood and everything about it, except for the occasional out-of-place artifacts we find.
Right, there's apparently a skeleton found in a cave in Afghanistan, according to Steve Quayle. I interviewed the pilot years ago. It's a strange story, but does that tell us then where the giants went? They were just all obliterated in a flood?
That's the story we were told, that some other stories escape, or some of them managed to escape, and some people think they actually made it into space and are maybe colonizing planets as we speak. I mean, we're talking about very advanced beings, people who are kind of like us, except probably smarter and more aggressive. Think of Khan from Star Trek II. That's basically what the giants were. They not only did they not want to give up, they could not give up. They were designed to be obsessive, compulsive, attack psychopaths, basically, that constantly attacked and never forgave and never gave up. And that's why they had to be destroyed, because they were designed to destroy everything around them except for themselves. And ultimately, in their psychosis, they ended up destroying themselves, too.
Now, let's talk a little bit about your work on the riddle of the Sphinx. You did that in 2012. What is the riddle of the Sphinx?
The riddle of the Sphinx is a very interesting little story. It actually comes from the play Oedipus Rex. And the story, the hero Oedipus is returning to the city of Thebes, and he's met on the way by a sphinx, which is basically the head of a woman with the body of a lion and the wings of an eagle, and it swooped out of its lair in a cave in the rocks and told him, you can pass if you can tell me the answer to my riddle, otherwise I will devour you. And the riddle was, what is it that walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? Do you know what the answer is?
Me? No, I do not.
Okay. The answer is man, who crawls along on 4 legs as a baby, 2 legs as an adult male, and 3 legs as an old person with a cane.
A cane. Okay,
right.
Interesting.
And so that by itself was interesting. But what I determined after my study of the Bible is that I was thinking this sounds kind of familiar, and I looked back at some of the prophecies, and the prophecy of Judah in let's see, it's Genesis 49:9, when the patriarch Jacob, when he was dying, and they were living in Egypt, and the 12 tribes were about to inherit from him, he gave prophecies about what would befall them in the end times. And the prophecy regarding Judah, the progenitor of the Jews, says that, if I could quote this, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down. He couched as a lion and as an old lion. Who shall rouse him up? And I realized, that has the same kind of situation where there's 3 ages of man, except it's like 3 ages of a lion. And the Sphinx was like part lion, part man. And there we have Judah being described as part lion, part man as well. And he's also talking about a lion's whelp, which is a young lion. Couched as a lion as an adult, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? And when you're talking about couch as a lion, you're talking about the Sphinx, because the Sphinx is known throughout Egypt as being this great lion, which crouches on the plain of the Giza necropolis. And I think my theory is in the book is that they're talking about something that is buried underneath the Sphinx, and they're identifying exactly what will befall Judah in the end times, is that he will go to the Sphinx and he'll find what's buried underneath it in the secret chambers. And
and they have found the chambers. They just haven't told us what's in there yet.
Yeah, and they know the chambers are there, but they have not been allowed to find them. I suspect there's a very powerful technology from the world before the flood possibly a number of different technologies, including what we would call optical hard drives made of sapphire, which contain all knowledge from the world before the flood.
And what about renderings for the Great Pyramids? Do you think they could be in the Hall of Records there?
It is possible there's things hidden in the Great Pyramid and the other pyramids, actually. Great Pyramid, we know, above the Grand Gallery or near it, there's actually a large space that sonar has discovered. It has been undiscovered. It's a huge space. It looks like a large storage area that's probably containing a lot of artifacts that will tell us a lot about our ancient history, possibly from the world before the flood, because some people think the pyramids are actually built before the flood and survived it, because there's actually water damage in parts of the flood.
That's right.
They've been around for a long time, long enough for there to be water in that region, which was not since before 10,000 BC, which was around the time of the ending of the last ice age and the probable time of the Great Flood.
Robert Schoch was on our program last week, and he was, of course, one of the originators of that theory.
He's done an amazing job of really, really doing a thorough analysis of all the geographical elements, and that discovery regarding the water erosion was a masterpiece. That really revolutionized our understanding of the Gizeh necropolis, specifically the Sphinx. And it was quite obvious, if you look at it now, that there was a very large amount of water erosion over thousands of years. It's not something that could happen accidentally over a short period of time. That required a very ancient age for the Sphinx and a lot of rain over a long period of time, proving absolutely the Sphinx and probably the pyramids and the Sphinx temples and all the rest are many thousands of years older than we think they are, and from a different era and a different history that we've been told.
And what are your thoughts on end times as it relates to all of this, Doug?
One of the theories I had about the Sphinx was it was actually the great red beast of Revelation. One of the reasons I came to that conclusion is that the Sphinx, as we know, has had its head recarved several times, at least once. Because right now its head is about maybe a third or 1/4 the size that it should be proportionally. It's basically a pinhead on top of a full-size lion body. And my theory was when I was trying to figure out what was the dragon of Revelation 17 and 18, is that the dragon was actually it was said to have 7 heads and 10 horns. And when I was looking at the Gizeh necropolis from above, I realized there was exactly 10 pyramids in the Gizeh necropolis, which looked kind of like large horns. But also, so where do you get the 7 heads? My theory is that the 7 heads are actually 7 heads of 7 kings over time that have been recarved from the original large head of the Sphinx. It got smaller every single time until the last of the kings, which is number 6 or 7, is actually the last in line, or maybe number 6. Number 7 might be the Antichrist, or maybe number 8. It's not clear. But my theory is that they're actually, John was actually talking about the Sphinx when he was talking about the great red dragon. And there's other reasons for that, is that the dragon was said to come out of the earth. The Sphinx is actually in its Sphinx enclosure. It looks like it's actually crawling out of the earth because the enclosure is actually beneath the waterline, or very close to it. So the Sphinx actually is kind of beneath the level of that area. It looks like it's crawling out of the earth. And the Sphinx was also originally painted red, just like the red dragon of Revelation was. And so we actually have a number of different coincidences here, kind of matching up with the Gizeh necropolis, which I've always felt was important at the end times intuitively. And so the more I study this location, the more I realize this might be Revelation Central in terms of activities in the end times, including some very important high technology and secrets that have been hidden there since the flood.
Is it conceivable that the Egyptians have already burrowed down into that Hall of Records at the base of the Sphinx and just never told us what's in there?
I suspect that there is something so dangerous down there that they have decided not to do that.
But they know what it is.
I think there are secret societies that have been guarding that for thousands of years, who know exactly what's down there and are preventing anyone from finding it until the time prophesied sometime in the future. I think the Antichrist will actually discover these artifacts, and it'll make him so powerful he'll actually be able to it'll help him conquer and control the entire world.
My God. And you think that whatever is down there might have been used before?
I think that the things down there were so powerful and so dangerous that they were purposely kept hidden in a very difficult way to find.
E.T. technology?
Yes, actually. Nephilim technology, fallen angel technology, ETs. technology that's so powerful and so dangerous that mankind must not be allowed to find it.
And they just decided to hide it down there at the base of the Sphinx.
It's too useful to destroy, but it's too dangerous to let loose, so they kept it underneath the Sphinx and probably some other places around the Giza necropolis.
Wow, that's kind of scary, isn't it?
Well, it's apocalyptic. I mean, if the people who get a hold of this stuff, if it is what I think it is, it literally would be invincible.
And welcome back to Coast. One of our favorites, Marshall Masters, author, publisher. He's got his own internet radio show, founder of Your Own World Books, of course. Marshall, how are you?
Well, good, George. Great to be back.
This Planet X could very well be another sun in the solar system, can it?
That's what we're observing. And, when I was on the show with you back in July, we were talking about our video, Planet X Observations.
Yeah.
And we've actually had folks, YouTubers, who have been posting their observations, and they're finding the similar object in the same area of the sky, which visually is about at the 10 o'clock on the sun's position. And when folks are looking at it. But what we've also noticed that is starting to happen right now, and it's really concerning us, is that there's wolf pack disinformation attacks. And people are posting these videos coming under a very scathing attack. And this is tradecraft. This is disinformation tradecraft with bait-and-switch headlines, salted information. Salting is where you put some reasonably useful information, but then you target your attacks within that. And then, of course, the ad hominem attacks. And there's several different things, but we see the same tradecraft coming from these different attacking sites. And one in particular is a fellow by the name of Logan Running on YouTube. And it prompted me to put up a couple of articles on our site. And one is, Are You a Planet X Nibiru Soldier for Truth? And I was really writing an open letter to this guy, and he's been beaten down. He put up two videos with observations on 2 days, September 15th and September 16th. Mm-hmm. And both videos, he's seeing it. So there's persistence, which is, there's three things we look for. We want to see provenance. Who are you? Where were you? The who, what, where, why, when, and how.
That's right.
The second thing we want to see is resolution, because if it's a cell phone or it's a video camera, the resolution isn't strong enough for us to really do a detailed analysis. Doesn't matter whether you're high definition or not. All video is 72 dpi. So what we like is video, but we want those stills. And then the third thing we're looking for is persistence. Can you go out and replicate this day after day? And this one fellow, Logan Running, is a YouTuber. He managed to do that, but he was real cocky about it, and he titled his, debunk this, you B.I., finish the rest of it. Yeah, I'm not going to go there. And, when I looked at what he did with his title, to me it was made as much sense as wearing a sandwich sign that says, "Kiss me, I'm Jewish," and walking through downtown Tehran. You're just asking for it. Well, this guy got hammered, and he got hammered so bad. There's a couple of sites that we've seen have taken down some other people that were doing good work. They went after him, and he then switched his videos to private. But then we noticed that he switched a bunch of his other videos.
Who might he be in real life?
He actually, he's on his videos. He's a good old boy from the South with, with the barroom bravado.
Is he a government worker or something like that?
No, the guy doesn't, he's just probably a working stiff, a blue-collar guy with an interest. And in terms of our research, it's like what we call a civilian. You don't go after the civilians. I'm a researcher. I get attacked. Other researchers get attacked. But this guy's just out there. He sees something. He's been following everybody. He's nobody particularly important. Probably a truck driver for all I know.
Well, truck drivers are important.
Well, yeah, they are. Everybody's
They are to me.
Yeah. And He's just...
What you mean is someone in some kind of academic level.
He's not an academic, okay? He's a good old working boy, all right? You can tell it. The thing is that when he did his video and it reached out to me, the headline was just, he was asking for it. He was just asking for it. But listening to this man talking about I've been looking for this.
Well, how many hits has he had? I mean, why do you even care about him?
He got a lot of hits. The reason why I care about it is that these are the kind of folks that are going to make observations. They're going to report them, and it's vital to our research.
But you don't like the way he's reporting it.
Well, I didn't care much for the way he's reporting it, but it was a compelling video nonetheless, because when we looked at it, it couldn't be debunked as a reflection because there's clouds moving in front of the second object, and the clouds are moving naturally. Now, the guys that are attacking him said it was a Photoshop hoax. Well, we analyzed his video. There was enough resolution. There was no Photoshop.
No Photoshop.
What he put up was what he shot with his camera. And while he may have been lacking on provenance, what got him into trouble was the persistence. He did it on one day, and then just to prove he could do it again, he went out the next morning, and he did it again. And then he posted that. And that was when he really got nailed. But on the first one, and we had downloaded a copy of that video, and my subscribers can download it from my site. But you listen to the man, and there's no way he could have been hoaxing or faking this thing. This man was seeing something, and he was excited about it, and he had discovered it.
But Marshall, why aren't other astronomers telling us about this? Professional astronomers.
Professional astronomers were doing it quite a bit on our site at yowusa.com. If you scroll down the homepage, there'll be an article called Planet X Cover-Up in Mainstream Media. And what we saw was after Velikovsky in the 50s with Worlds in Collision, it started to trickle. And mainstream astronomers, mainstream media, there was a lot of talk about what they were calling nemesis, that would be our sister to our soul, our smaller sister, our second sun. And there was a lot of conversation on that until Robert Harrington of the Naval Observatory in Washington went out. He wrote a paper on Planet X, where to find it. He had a telescope made. Observations were done in New Zealand. But he also appeared in a documentary with Zecharia Sitchin. And the man died very suddenly, very mysteriously. And what we did was we methodically tracked all of the media coverage on Planet X. And it was building and building and building until Harrington died, and that sent the signal that it was a third-rail topic. And you literally could see in the publishing stats, it went off a cliff into a vacuum. So this is just something where it's a taboo topic. It's tightly controlled. There's a lot of suppression on it. And we also have an article on the mysterious death of Robert Harrington. So that put the word out. And what we're seeing right now, George, is a lot of suppression. And we're seeing just good, honest, decent people who are trying to report their observations. And they're getting creamed. And the reason why I really had to step up was I understand how they're doing it because they've done it to me, and I've seen them do it to other researchers. They're starting to go after livelihoods. It's one thing to smear somebody on the Internet. It's another thing to pick up the phone and call their boss and, well, we're investigating this guy. What do you know about him? And ask a lot of disturbing questions. That's when people start pulling all their old videos. They start shutting down, is when they get hit at that level. They'll pull one video in response to the attacks. But when we start seeing what we're seeing, not only in his site, but on other sites, we know the suppression machine is at full power right now. And that's the reason why we published a couple of articles to help people who want to report their observations to do so without putting themselves at unnecessary risk. There's risk in it no matter what you do. If you see two suns in the sky and you want to go on YouTube, you need to be diligent about it, straightforward, give it just like a news reporter would give it. Don't put, the oh my God and what, all these theatrics. It is just simply like chumming the waters, and they will hit you and shut you down. And I just don't want to see any more innocent people getting hurt. As it is, we see enough other signs. I'm looking at just what's happening with meteors, all right? And this was something that we led with in my video, Planet X System Observations. But the American Meteor Society on fireballs, bolides, and a fireball is anything that's going to be brighter than Venus. But what we're seeing is that there's a new trend where we have multi-state observations of these things. So the overall stats of meteor observations are going up exponentially right now. But concurrent with that, in a recent thing, we're starting to see where there's multi-state, 4 or 5 states, where people are reporting on the same object because it's so bright in the sky. And you can go to amsmeteors.org and go to that website and you can look at the fireball reports, compare 2013, and then look at that, then go look at 2005, 2006. You'll see the same trend that we're seeing. But we're also seeing a lot of bright reports. 25th of September, an RCMP officer in Manning, Alberta, caught one. It was really, really bright. There's also a meteor impact in Alabama. It actually impacted. It was a large meteorite. And NASA said it was boulder size, came in around 33,000 miles an hour. They haven't found it yet. But what was of interest to me was that they said it was not part of the torrid meteor shower, as some had suspected. So it's a rogue that is coming in. Now, that's interesting for me with the rogues because remember back with that comet that hit in Siberia this year, back in February, I believe?
Yes, I remember that. Of course, 1,400 people hurt.
Yeah. And that thing released energy equivalent to about 20 Hiroshima bombs. Imagine what would happen if that had detonated, airbursted as it did, over a city like Chicago or San Francisco.
Well, that could have been a disaster of biblical proportions, Marshall. But let me ask you a couple quick questions with this.
Sure.
One, if there is an object out there, why is it being suppressed? Why don't they simply say, oh, my gosh, what a discovery? Is it because it presents unbelievable catastrophes every time it gets close and they don't want to scare us?
Well, it's really what the elites always do. They always suppress something like this right to the last minute. It's what I call Titanic rules. First class gets the boats. Steerage goes down with the ship. We are steerage. What does it mean to be steerage? Very simply, the first to fall are the last to know. Think back to that movie, 2012. If you get past the eye candy and look at the subtext, that's exactly what happened, is that the information was suppressed so that the elites could get to their arcs, and everybody else that was decent, they wind up figuring out the day they die that that's it, game over. So, the interesting thing is that was the realistic part of that movie, and that's what's happening here. But this is always the case. Ruling elites will always suppress. If they know there's bad news coming like this, they'll suppress it for as long as they possibly can to maintain the status quo. Because otherwise, how are they going to do whatever it is that they're going to do if everybody's busy digging bunkers and going to Costco?
Well, let's take a call. Greg is in Meadview, Arizona, west of the Rockies. Hey, Greg, you're on with Marshall Masters. Go ahead.
Yeah, wasn't there just a fireball? I just caught on the news here. Someone caught it on videotape.
Many. They're all over the place lately.
Well, yeah, someone called from Texas, but there was one on, they actually showed it on television here just tonight.
Over Arizona, over your neck of the woods.
I thought it was maybe in Canada, but it's actually on videotape, and I didn't catch where it was, but I know somebody out there is well aware of it because it made it on national news. And, George, thanks for doing a great job. Keep it up. And
you got it, Greg. We will do that, indeed. Well, the fireballs are everywhere, Marshall, and they could be coming from rogue elements.
They could be coming from rogue elements, but what's concerning me, George, is that there's this increasing pattern of multi-state. You know, it was interesting. The caller was how do you pinpoint who saw it in what state? Well, that's a tough question when you're seeing reports on a single bolide coming in from 4 or 5 different states. And that's the point of it. I look at, for me, it's not the individual events. I'm always looking for what is the trend. And the trends are all getting worse, which is, to me, an indicator that something's happening. Even in February 15th, the one that hit in Russia, NASA, you know, they had a moonwalk backwards on that whole thing because they were looking at DA 2012.
Well, and nobody expected that. Nobody tracked that meteorite when it came in. Nobody even knew it was happening. It just occurred, just like that.
Boom. And what NASA said, their words from their website, it came from the sun, and they didn't have any telescopes pointed in that direction.
Huh.
So the thing is that we're still having this pattern.
Now, let me ask you, though, about Planet X. There are some, there's camp out there, and you know that, who believe that what we're talking about is an inhabited planet. And then, of course, there's the theory, as we've just been talking about, of an extra sun binary star system. I would tend, if it was one or the other, be more of a binary star system.
Well, it would put us in a binary star system. That's what we're in. And, 90% of the solar systems in our galaxy have 2 or more suns. So you really have to be an oddball to be a single sun, solar system. We've got 2 suns. And, we're tracking. People are seeing it. It's not something that's easy to observe. It's the reason why it's catch as catch can. But even, on Turrialba, which you've really been so great in helping us with that and helping us to find people who are interested, because this third camera that was installed was gifted by the United States government, after which we didn't have enough resolution. The focus was changed. I mean, it just wasn't useful at all. But we're still able to image and find bluebonnet with this new government camera, even though it was intentionally designed to sabotage the work, at least our work. The way that they had set it up, the point of view and the direction that they pointed it. So we're still persistent on our bluebonnet object, which means 3 different camera systems from the same location are imaging the same object. So there's the persistence there. And we're seeing that. We're seeing the image that Jorge Arena took at altitude over the Pacific off the coast of South America, and which was a very clear image. It was the first visible light observation of the brown dwarf that is in our binary, that it's the twin to our sun. But we're also seeing these reports from people that they're observing that same object. It's like it's in the same position, same place in the sky, different places, different spots, but they're finding it as well. And what we're seeing, George, that concerns us is the ones that are really putting up the quality observations are getting hammered like nails. And they're getting hammered into suppression tactics. And so it's really, it's hard to say, let's have a conversation with Planet X when anything that's really useful is getting kicked off into the curb, darn near as fast as it comes up.
What is your timetable, Marshall?
Timetable is, I think, by the end of this year, we're seeing it now. The question is when are people going to start looking? But we're seeing it now. My concern, because particularly, and your caller who called about this fireball, I think he's really got the right instinct, because we could very well have some impact events that start happening. To my way of thinking, and here I got to agree with McCaney on it. This thing it's going to come in, it's going to be preceded by a swarm of garbage, and it's going to be followed by a swarm of garbage. And I think this is the leading edge of it. We're starting to see it. The stats from the American Meteor Society tell me that. I think that by the end of this year, we're probably going to have some sort of event that is going to scare people, and it's going to wake them up, and they're going to look at it. And I think that's the reason why we're seeing the heavy suppression that we are right now, this heavy, it's really nasty what's happening to people. And we've got some articles on our site at yowusa.com. If you see two suns in the sky, you want to record it before you put it on YouTube, please, please, please read our articles. We wrote them for you folks, because those of you that have the guts to see something, step up, man up, go to the plate and share it with people. We just don't want to see you get clobbered.
We've got Brian, though, truck driving in Pittsburgh, east of the Rockies. Hey, Brian, thanks for calling.
Hey, George, thanks. How are you guys doing tonight?
We're doing well, thank you.
Great. About a year ago, I actually just sent you pictures to your email.
Okay.
I was driving overnight, and it was about maybe 7 a.m. The sun was coming up, and the sky was getting bright. And as I'm driving down the highway, I noticed what looked like a smaller sun right to the left of the sun in the clouds. And so I drove about maybe 20 minutes or so, and it was still there. And I found that pretty weird. And so I took a picture of that, and then I went into a fast food place, and when I came out, where it had been, it faded. So I put my camera phone up there, and I took a picture right where it had been, and I just zoomed in, took the picture, and then I used my phone just to darken it, and you could literally see a planet right there through the clouds. And so I sent you both of those pictures.
I look forward to that. That's fascinating.
That was crazy.
We will.
Gosh, yeah, send it to me, info@yowza.com. I'd love to see your pictures, too.
Please spell that out for him, Marshall.
Just send it, info@yowza, YOWUSA.com.
This object, has it been the subject of discussion with the ancients on this planet?
Oh, yes. There's a lot of folklore on it. I think it's even discussed in the Bible. Depending on which translation, if you're using a Bible that talks about the word destroyer, that is what the ancient Hebrews and what the ancient Egyptians called it. It's had a lot of other names. It's very well documented in the Colburn Bible, and which is actually predicting its return about this time, that the harbinger signs of its return have already come to pass. So there's the documentation on it from the ancients is just over. You just start looking for it, and you find it, and you find it, and you find it. And, they're sending the message forward in time to us. But it's also, even in the past, this knowledge was suppressed, too. It was kept from the public. And that's the same thing that's going on right now. But still the same. I think, I was just really delighted to hear your caller, that he actually stopped. He looked, he was thinking about it. He went and took a second observation. This is great. I love people when they do this stuff and they go and share it with others.
What do you recommend with people who have telescopes, if they want to try to look for this object, what do they do? Okay.
Right now, you're just going to see it either before sunrise or before sunset because it's an object close to the sun. If you're going on to the sky programs, this data is, usually it goes back to 2007, and if there are star panels that are useful, they've been blanked out. So it's really more a case of what this gentleman did, is that when you see it, get a camera, stop, and document it. And because it's something that it depends on atmospherics. We have a lot of a lot more moisture in our sky because of weather weirding. We also have the chemtrail spraying, so our visibility is dramatically reduced nowadays. And the reports coming in, what I find interesting is what your driver was telling me, and this goes back to this same fellow that I was telling you earlier about, Logan Runnin. Logan spotted it around sunrise.
Well, so there's something there then. We're going to be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. So this incredible book, by the way, it's huge. How long have you been working on this one, Surviving the Planet X Tribulation?
This one took me 2 years to write, and what I was really doing with this one was targeting a very specific time, which is the last window of opportunity. That'll be when the object is visible everywhere, but people will be debating it. They're going to have a lot of experts saying, don't worry about it, it's just an interesting light show. But there are going to be people that take their own counsel, look at it, and they're going to go, this is a clear and present danger. What I need is a plan. We need to pull together people. And that is the big thing with the book is you have to create a community if you're going to do this at the last opportunity. There's a lot of people who have already built their bunkers, stockpiled them, and if you haven't done it by now, it's pretty dicey.
Now, you've used the word tribulation, which sounds a little biblical to me, which means Book of Revelation.
Yeah.
What's coming here?
Well, what's coming is we're going to be watching this, and it's a mini constellation. It's got a brown dwarf star, Nemesis, at the core of it. We call it the Planet X system. Then it has its own cluster of moons and planets. Now, what it's doing is it's coming up from the southern skies. It's behind the sun, but we're going to be merging with it, and so it will pass overhead. None of the objects, the planets or the moons or Nemesis, are going to impact the Earth, but they are going to cause a tremendous amount of devastation for us. And interestingly enough, Ed Dames had his big Planet X seminar in Las Vegas last month, and what he says corroborates my books.
That's not a good thing.
You know what? I think Ed and I would agree with you on that. I don't want to see it. It's going to be a very, very difficult time, but the signs are clearly there. The thing that we're tracking, and that's my wife does the article, Signs on Yowza, and the increase in meteors is really alarming.
They seem to be. I know, and they seem to be getting closer. I mean, the one that happened a few years ago over Russia that injured 1,400 people, caught on video. I mean, how many more of these are we going to have?
Well, just recently, we've had 2 of them that were discovered within days of them transiting past the Earth at a relatively close distance between Earth and the Moon, and one as close as, the geosynchronous satellites that carry our cable TV programming. And those would have really been devastating. The one that hit in Chelyabinsk, or was airbursted, was a super bolide, and it released between 20 to 30 times the force of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. And luckily, it detonated over Siberia, in the middle of nowhere. Imagine what would have happened if that had detonated, airbursted over Paris, London, New York. Yeah.
Would have been a disaster of biblical proportions.
Absolutely. And we're tracking the number of fireball sightings, meteors, bolides, and it's just ever since Chelyabinsk 2013, it just keeps ratcheting up, George. Every month. This last month, August, 24% more fireballs and observations than August of the previous year. And that month, and you go back to 2013, and the trend just keeps going up and going up and going up. And so you have to ask, how long is it going to be, especially since we're now having daytime fireballs? This is somewhat new, where you have a fireball that is so bright it outshines the sun, and people can see it. This is a new thing that's happening. So we really, just looking at the data, trending it since 2013, the steady increases. What we believe we're going to see between now and the end of the year will be a significant event with loss of life. And what I mean by significant is something that will force mainstream media to cover it honestly.
And this Planet X cluster that you talk about, is that what is bringing all this with it?
Yes, it's pulling it with it, but it's also pushing it. And there are objects in orbit around the sun that are in benign orbits, but they're what we call PHAs, potentially hazardous asteroids. And it's coming through like a cue ball. And so these things are being scattered ahead of it. So not only is it going to drag a bunch of debris, it's also pushing it ahead, with this cue ball effect. That is what we believe we are seeing right now in the empirical data.
Marshall, let's talk about some of the other activities that this could bring to this planet. And then we'll get into this Planet X specifically and have you explain what this could be. Mm-hmm. But they're talking about, just tonight I had a story about a volcano that's on the big island in Hawaii, Kilauea, and they think it could blow. Does this planetary cluster have anything to do with things like that?
Well, it's indirect. What we are seeing is that there is an interaction between Nemesis, which is, we're in a binary star system, and it's the smaller twin to Sol. Nemesis and Sol are interacting. Sol is consequently affecting Earth and, like, for example, the ice pack in Greenland. They're discovering is that it's melting from underneath, not on top, as they were saying before. So what we are seeing is that the core of the Earth is becoming hotter and more active, which is in turn going to cause more earthquakes, more volcanism, and both of those are definitely on the uptick right now. And so, along with a whole host of other problems. So indirectly, it's a collateral damage kind of a situation.
We just had a little 3.5 near San Francisco, and one of our earthquake experts says that it was done by man, that we created it with all the things that we've been doing up that way on purpose. Will that contribute to this too, Marshall?
Well, it could to an extent. I think human activity does exacerbate what are underlying natural trends, but the bulk of it is natural. Now, we're just kind of like a tick in the hound's ear, and the hound is scratching us out. But what's really driving this is what's going on between Nemesis and Sol right now. They're duking it out, and like I said, we're the collateral damage, and it's only going to get worse.
It's only going to get worse. That's just what we need to know, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's talk a little bit about this Planet X cluster. Is this what Zecharia Sitchin was talking about?
He was talking about the planet Nibiru.
Right.
And actually, the very first person to talk about this was Carlos Muñoz Ferrada, phenomenal man, a Chilean astronomer who announced its existence in 1940. And what he said was that there was a black star with a large planet in orbit around it. And so that's where we first have this mini constellation concept, is from Parada. And in 2006, we broke the story on the South Pole Telescope. We said it was the perfect instrument to observe this coming in from the south. And in 2008, there were disclosure videos which were very quickly crushed. But what they showed was Nemesis and 5 to 7 objects around it. So, yes, this is a mini constellation. It's coming in. Now, in my book, Being in It for the Species, this is where I first introduce the primary objects in this system that are going to have a direct effect on Earth in terms of the coming pole shift. There's, of course, Nemesis, which is a brown dwarf star. And this is incredibly difficult to see these because they're very dirty.
What is and this has come around before, so how often?
3,600 years.
So Sitchin got that right.
Sitchin did. What Sitchin should have done that would have helped everybody was he just said 3,600 years. He didn't specify whether those were Gregorian years or lunar years.
Right. Well, we just assume years, right?
Right. And so we think, Gregorian. When you take 3,600 lunar years and contrast it with history, it just fits in the last flyby being the Exodus, the 10 plagues.
How many astronomers can see this cluster or they know it's out there?
Well, the government is clearly observing it and have been for quite some time. There's a huge cover-up. It is a third-rail topic. Astronomers who are doing deep space work die mysterious deaths. So they're not going to come forward. And you're starting to see a few that are doing it, but the suppression on them is very tight. However, we're seeing things that are, like on YouTube, there's a tremendous amount of activity. I've never seen this much in all the years that I've been doing this.
Now, what do you mean by that? What kind of activity on YouTube?
Well, people are monitoring webcams, taking pictures.
Amateurs are, right?
Amateurs, and there's a lot of them where you see them, they're doing moon rises, and they don't know the difference. But last April, I published an article, Helion in the Planet X system observed in Brazil. And a young fellow on the web, his name is Dave Beebe, on YouTube, has a sighting from today, the very same object. And it's the webcam that's picking up in Sao Paulo. And it's not only brighter, but it's bigger, and it's the same object I documented back in April. So there are legitimate sightings. The ones that you see on YouTube that you want to be leery of are the ones where the object rises from left to right. The object, if you're looking at something that's going to be legitimate, look around the 3 o'clock position relative to the sun with an object tracking with the sun and rising from right to left. And that's what this one in Sao Paulo is doing. And it's he put it up today, emergency Nemesis Planet X Nibiru sighted 9/13/16 Sao Paulo, Brazil. So if you actually wanted to see one of the objects, I call it Helion because, as I documented in both of my books, you have 3 main planets. The first one is Helion, and it is a large, bright, star-like planet. It's a hot planet.
Marshall, the people in the past who have talked about a Planet X, the Nancy Leaders, the Mark Hazelwoods, people like that, yourself included, I mean, were you all talking about the same object?
I wouldn't say that we were all talking about the same object. There's different theories, different times. Sometimes they just get it wrong. Nancy Leader, I published my first article in 2002, January. And immediately I was immersed into this Mark Hazelwood, Nancy Leader flyby scare of 2003.
Yes.
And it was, wow, that was a terrible time.
And to my knowledge, nothing came around, right?
Yeah, we published an article, Zeta Factor, Zeta Hysteria. And actually, Zachariah Sitchin was so impressed with our scientific approach to it, he called me and gave me an interview because he wanted to stand in opposition to what they were doing. He had just brought out his book, Lost Book of Enki, and a lot of people were accusing him of setting up this non-event just to sell books. And he was really furious about that. And for me, though, the terrible part of what Nancy and Mark Hazelwood did was they scared people. And we used to get emails that I couldn't sleep at night.
Well, I mean, but aren't we scaring people now, Marshall?
No, I don't think we're scaring people. Not when you can go on YouTube and find this guy, Dave B., and you can look at it and see for yourself. You can go read my article, Hellion, all right? And on my website, Hellion and the Planet X System Observed in Brazil. I come across it. I don't publish that often.
Mm-hmm.
People wish I was, kind of pumping content all the time. Not my style. If I have something intelligent to say, I'll publish. And if I don't feel I have something intelligent to say, I don't. And you can go, your listeners can go and check these two things, for themselves this evening. And then you decide for yourself. And my whole approach to this is I don't want to scare people because it's hard enough for folks that are in awareness in the first place because they get brutalized by their families. It's, oh my God, there you go again. And they and they're trying to share their information out of love, and what they get in return is pretty awful. And so I feel a huge responsibility to the people who are in awareness, who've been following the topic, who are staying ahead of it and dealing with it, to give them quality information and support them. So, no, I'm not interested in scaring anybody. I want them to survive. That's my thing. I just want people to live through it.
Did this Planet X situation cause the flood of Noah, for example?
Yes. And actually that is well documented in the Colburn Bible, an ancient wisdom text. And in the first books of the Colburn Bible, those were penned by the ancient Egyptians in about the same time as the as the Torah that was being written. And what it says is that it definitely caused it. The story is called the story of Sesuda and Hanok. Now, the interesting thing about that is that Noah's flood, there are over 150, by some accounts as many as 200, different stories, flood stories, deluge stories, across the planet.
Marshall, this planet that comes around, which you believe could have been responsible for the flood of Noah, what about the downing of Atlantis even farther back? Possible?
Yes. I think that three major events, Atlantis, Exodus, and Noah's flood, or the deluge account, those are attributed to previous flybys, which, by the way, the flybys are hard for Nibiru, the planet that Sitchin wrote about. That's the outermost planet in the Planet X system. And its atmosphere is damaged, and so that's the reason why the Anunnaki came to Earth mining gold, so they could repair their atmosphere. And, it's one of those things, when you start talking about Anunnaki and Planet X together in a modern context, that's a third rail. But it's when it comes through, it's going to cause a lot of problems. What we're going to see is it will pass over our heads. Nemesis will be then, as it goes through the plane of the system, the ecliptic, it'll be between Mars and Jupiter. And then as it's going down, its other planets, there's three major planets, Helion, and then Arbota and Nibiru, and two of those have their own moon.
Are there life forms on those planets?
In my book, Being in It for the Species, I talk extensively about the Anunnaki and what they're going to do.
So they're still there? They're
there. And when they come, it's going to be like the mafia collecting the vig.
Ed Dames talks about his kill shot, Marshall. What do you think?
Ed is right on the money. And in 2004, he brought out his first kill shot video. And I saw that, and it was early in my research. And I felt it was really interesting, but I wasn't as far along as Ed was in 2004. Last year, he was doing an RV class in Reno, and I had the chance to attend that thanks to Leva Neva Gloria. And I went up during a break and handed him a copy of my book, and I said, "Hi, I'm Marshall Masters." He says, "I know. I've heard your name a lot." And I said, I took your video from 2004, which has been sitting on my shelf since I watched 2004. And I played it again for the first time last night. And you're on the money. You really nailed it. And what he said in 2004, which is the exact same thing that I say in Being in It for the Species and Surviving the Planet X Tribulation, is that while Nemesis is going to pass between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, its planets are going to be much closer to us, specifically Nibiru, which will pass between the Earth and the Sun. And as a result of that, we're going to have the days of darkness. That is going to happen.
How did you come across all of this?
Well, partly, start with science, but at a point where science just, you kind of run out of gas, and also there's a lot of suppression of the data. But I used, for my book, Being in It for the Species, I used channeling. Ed's method is he uses remote viewing, and I can just briefly explain the difference.
Sure.
It's not fortune-telling. These are very disciplined approaches, channeling and remote viewing. Both use the right hemisphere of the mind. The difference is that with channeling, you're contacting another entity across the veil, whereas with the remote viewing, you're tapping into what Ed calls the matrix or the Akashic record. Now, what's important to understand is that both American and Russian intelligence agencies use both methods, RV and psychic. The Russians put greater emphasis on psychic, and the Americans put a greater emphasis on RV. Ed does RV for both Russian and American intelligence agencies on a freelance contract basis. And that was the reason why there was one thing that he mentioned when he was doing this conference, and I didn't personally attend it. I had reliable sources, multiple sources, who reported everything back to me, and I debriefed them extensively. But he said one thing, and when I heard it, I just said, "Oh my God, Ed, man, you stepped on the third rail with that. You went off the reservation, and you really put yourself, he may have put himself in harm's way, frankly." And the point was, in the morning session, he said that once Nemesis reaches perihelion, which is its closest distance to the sun, that according to Carlos Ferrado, that it would take 57 years to complete that transit, so that it was only going to be a problem for everybody's grandchildren, not for us. Now, in the United States, in the English language market, I've written more about Ferrada than anyone else. And when I heard that, I went, that's a red herring. That is something that was fed to Ed, and a Faustian bargain, if you will. He could talk about it because he said, Planet X is real, Planet X is incoming. We're going to see it in December 2017, and when we do, it'll be the size of the moon. And so he was very specific. But this point of perihelion was, when I heard that, I knew that was something that, and I'm speculating here, but because of his intelligence contacts and God knows how many non-disclosure agreements he's signed, he had to feed that. And what happened was, in the afternoon, he came back and he said, when we remote viewed this, that transit period is not 57 years, it's 6 months. 6 months matches exactly with what I've been writing about in my books. And so what he told everyone in the class was, you can believe Ferrada or you can believe me. And that's how he handled it. And he had a moment of conscience. And he came right out, and because he understood that if he left it that way, saying, well, it'll hang up in the sky for 57 years and we don't have to worry about it, not for a long time, then people wouldn't organize and prepare and plan and do whatever they need to do to survive what's coming. And he didn't want that on his conscience. And so he came out in the afternoon and just said 6 months. When he did that, Ed Dames went off the reservation. All right? And that took a lot of guts. That took a lot of guts. And I congratulate the man for doing that. And I really do. He's retired. That was it. He's retired. And I think that his retirement, and is going to diminish the impact of that. But still the same. Someone with his visibility and his contacts saying, we RV'd it at 6 months. He was fed that line. And 57 years doesn't make sense to me. Just look at Kepler's second law, all right? When the object's coming to perihelion, speed is accelerating tremendously. So, that was a disinfo thing that was fed to him, and he dealt with it honorably.
Is this all survivable, Marshall?
Yes, it is. It is survivable. That's the whole basis of my book. And, there's a lot of people that are doing what I call me and mine preparation. I don't care if you have a $500,000 bunker or a $50,000 corrugated tube in the ground. That's not going to be the way to survive what could be a 10-year tribulation or longer. It's going to be pulling together with like-minded others and in a spiritual way. My book, Surviving the Planet X Tribulation, is a faith-based leadership guide. There are a lot of wonderful authors out there who've written books on survival. They've been on your show.
Holly Dale is one of them.
Yeah.
Steve Quayle, he's another.
Matthew Stein.
Yeah.
And
the list is endless.
Absolutely. And actually in my book, I reference their books, and so that people can go out and get them. But what I was doing was providing something that is not out there, which is a leadership guide. And particularly for faith-based organizations, they're the ones that are going to have the best ability to organize communities of 100 or more people. And so when I wrote the book, I really did it with two audiences in mind. One is people in awareness, particularly all these grandparents that are just beside themselves. They're on fixed incomes. They can't afford to build a bunker. Their children are not listening to them. They're terrified because, they're living in ground zero areas where they're certainly not going to make it through the tribulation. And what I'm trying to do is give them a tool and to say, look, once it's in the sky, once everybody sees it coming, that's a game changer. All right? That's when people say, we got to get to safety. And for faith-based leaders, that's when they say, I've got to get my flock to safety. And so for the ones that are in awareness, they don't properly value themselves. We live in a society that tells us who we are by what we have not. We don't have the best car. We don't have the biggest house. We don't have this. We don't have fame. We don't have the other thing.
Yeah, but who cares, right?
Yeah, who cares? I want people in awareness to understand the flip side, what they do have, because so many of them, George, and they're typically 45 to 65, have been in awareness since they were children. They have been thinking about this, planning about it. And what they don't understand is, imagine this from the viewpoint of a faith-based leader who's going, oh my God, I got to get my flock to safety. Okay? And what's going to be happening at that point is everyone that's around that leader is going to be running around like Chicken Little. And they need to be that, the eye of the storm. Around them is a hurricane of all kinds of emotion, but they need to be that clear, calm eye in the middle of the storm. And so what I tell those in an awareness is that you agreed with Creator to do this before you were ever born, to be a teacher, a mentor, and a comforter. And so yours is not to lead. Yours is to be in service to those who do lead, to help them to understand so that they can make wise decisions, and to be the one to comfort them, which is going to be very important because it's about saving life.
Well, when this cluster gets close, and when do you think that would be?
I believe that right now we're already starting to have a lot more observations on YouTube. So by the end of the year, that's going to increase dramatically. It's a matter of time, but the issue, George, is not whether or not people see it. Everybody says, "What I'm going to see it with my own two eyes."
Sure.
And the right question is, when am I going to believe that what I am seeing with my own two eyes represents a clear and present danger?
Now, will the Anunnaki who are in the system, will they get in spaceships? Will they come here?
Yes, they'll arrive in spaceships.
As they did before.
That's right. And it'll be shock and awe.
Are they what the Bible has called fallen ones?
I'm not theological, so I couldn't address that, but they are clearly documented. And the book, I think, that Sitchin published, that if I were going to say just one book that you're going to read from Sitchin, would be the Lost Book of Enki. Enki, Lord Enki of the Anunnaki, is, according to this book, and it's his autobiography, the human race as we are today, we came from his loins.
Gianni Noto, that's his last name, Gordon James Gianni Noto. He's been with me before. He's an attorney, contractor, ET contactee, and Gordon James, of course, had many childhood UFO and ET encounters. Saw his first UFO back in 1964, a 1-mile diameter mothership launching 3 saucers over San Juan, Puerto Rico harbor. He had his first vision of a pole shift in 1973. He realized the pole shift could also bring open contact with ETs, and here he is back on Coast to Coast. Gordon, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing really well, George, and I'm so pleased that you invited me back. It really means a lot to me because I have such respect for you.
Well, I'm looking forward to this. And what have you been up to over the past couple of years?
Oh my God! Well, I'm still working as hard as ever to be in contact with ETs and get information. And I've become very close friends with Nancy Leader, and we talk every single day, sometimes several times a day. And I really have an immense respect for her, and I've been able to help her with, not only with discussion of the answers to questions that are asked by the public, but also personal things and stuff like that. But I've had some real health difficulties. I took too many aspirin and have lost about half my eyesight.
Oh, you're kidding. What happened?
Well, aspirin, the American Medical Association did in their journal, the JAMA, in October of 2012, there's an article that people who take one baby aspirin a day for 10 years get what I have, which is wet macular degeneration. And I got it in 1 year for taking 2 aspirin every 2 hours.
Well, you took a lot. Why'd you take so much?
Well, I was doing hard, heavy work, and my back and my arms are really strong, and I was walking around doing granite staircases for mega mansions, and I was carrying 200-pound granite stones, and the weight of what I was carrying crushed the capillaries that were feeding my thigh bones, and my thigh bones, both of them, started dying, and that's called necrosis, not arthritis.
With your permission, can I get Doc Wallach, who comes on our show quite regularly and has helped a lot of people with macular degeneration?
I've heard rumors of that. I'd be very interested.
He'll get you some supplements on us, and I think he can help turn you around.
That would be very meaningful, because when I watch TV with my right eye, it looks like it's off.
Okay, we'll have Gina work on that with Tom, and we'll get this done.
I have to use a close-focus telescope to read the computer screen. I can read one word at a time.
Well, what we'll do is get you back on telling us how successful the program was, and now you could see again.
I guarantee you, if there's any improvement whatsoever, I will be saying that.
All right, we will do that. I'm going to have Gina and Tom.
If I'd been smart, I would have taken opiates, and I'd be out of rehab by now, and I'd still have my eyesight.
Oh, that's frustrating. Well, I take a little baby aspirin, but only one.
But I'm telling you right now, it doesn't say on the bottle aspirin can cause blindness, but it can.
Jeez, that's amazing. Well, let's talk to...
I want your listeners to know that. I mean, that's really important. I stumbled into that accidentally. I thought aspirin's from a willow tree bark. It's natural.
Right.
You know.
All right, well, we'll get to work on this for you.
And then I had to wait 5 years till I could have my hip replacement surgeries. And in the meantime, I developed tremendous muscle atrophy. And February of 2016, I was rushed to the hospital, and I had a blood clot in my lung and nearly died.
Oh, my God.
So I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. Then I spent 3 weeks in the hospital for my right hip, August and September, and then my left hip in November and December. But I'm learning to walk again. If I don't use the crutches or the walker, then people think I'm Frankenstein lurching off the table.
Well, let's get you back to health again.
Yeah, but my spirits are great, and my mind is still as sharp as ever.
That's good.
And I'm in touch with all kinds of information.
Let's go back to the beginning, Gordon, about the ET contactee. What happened? How did that happen?
With me?
Yeah.
Oh, it started when I was 5 years old. It was a nice summer day, and my father was away, and my brother was a baby, and I was 5, and she said she was going to take a nap, so I went into the bedroom to take a nap, and all of a sudden, about 3 adult extraterrestrials were standing there and said, "We're going to take you with us for a big meeting." And when they took me, and I'm not sure of the details. I mean, after all, I was only 5, but I can imagine that it was something dimensional. And I found myself that I was an adult, and we went to this 3-day meeting somewhere, and it was about a planet, and everybody was so unselfish and kind, and it had big white auras, and it was incredible. And I came back. And I woke up and I went in the bedroom and I told my mother, I said, "I've just been somewhere for 3 days." She goes, "That's not even possible. You were dreaming." And I said, "No, I know the difference between a dream." And that's when I first realized that things that were happening to me, when I explained them to other people, I wasn't necessarily going to be believed.
Did they have a plan for you?
Well, I discovered, I'm a very old soul, and Janet, who I said the extraterrestrials put Janet and me together after I asked them. to do that. And I was very specific. She had to be 6 feet tall and blonde, reddish blonde hair, blue eyes, half Scottish, half Scandinavian, sees UFOs, psychic, loves animals, especially cats. I mean, all these details. And a year later, I accidentally ran into her when I went out to lecture to 2 different UFO groups. And we had a date climbing a mountain in the Acadia National Park. And the next day I went back and I said, get all your stuff, you're moving in with me. And that was 27 years ago, 27 and a half years ago.
That's amazing. Now, Nancy Lieder, of course, was one of the first to talk about Planet X, channeling through the Zetas, of course. What's the latest with her?
Well, it's really interesting because there's a movement from behind the scenes, I guess you could say, to make sure that this comes out one way or another. And the Discovery Channel called me up and said, we want to do a show on Planet X, and we want to come to your house and film. And I thought, well, that's the last thing I want, because I live in such a distinctive area. If there were any footage of the background, everyone would know right to the square inch where I live. So I said no. And they asked Nancy if they could come to her house. And, of course, everybody knows where she lives. And so they went there, and this show was on the American Heroes Channel, a 1-hour show. And she was on first and in the middle and at the end. It wasn't, it wasn't everything that she would have wanted or that I would have wanted, but, because they do these clips and they interview various people and they mix it together. But it definitely came out that Planet X is real. She's in touch with extraterrestrial humans called the Zetas, and this needs to be told. So this is big news, really, if you think about it, that it was on a major channel.
Gordon, are you still practicing law, or you?
No, I
kind of retired.
After I was in Connecticut, I realized I didn't like most of the lawyers, and the mob had taken over in Connecticut, and everything was crooked. And I said, why am I inside with people who are violent and argumentative when I could move to Maine and work outside with my hands and have clients who are actually happy to see me? So that's what I did 32 years ago. And I was able to buy this mountaintop, and I've got 34 acres at the end of the road, no neighbors. 34 acres of blueberry fields, and I look out at 300 islands sparkling in the Gulf of Maine. There's 3,000 altogether, but I see about 300 from my front yard. And I'm 2 miles back from the ocean, and I figure this is going to be an island at pole shift. And on land, I've got turkeys, bear, moose, and deer, and in the water, I've got every fish, including lobsters and crabs. So.
And since you brought up pole shifts, where do we stand with that right now?
Well, we've been waiting for the other shoe to drop for something to happen now. Nancy had originally said that there's a schedule, she called it out of 10. So 10 out of 10 is pole shift. 9 out of 10 is like total destruction from volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis. And 8 is massive social change. And 7 is where I first started when I was first on your show in 2010. That first Japan was going to be shattered, then the New Madrid fault would go off, then a tsunami would overwash all of the UK. And, of course, that hasn't happened yet. And the Council of Worlds, which is 1,000 unselfish extraterrestrial races working together, is on the fourth dimension. They're trying to slant the whole thing. And the whole thing is the battle between, I call it the final battle between good and evil. So you have a choice personally to be service to self and be selfish, or be service to other and be empathetic and kind. So that's the major issue spiritually, regardless of pole shift, extraterrestrials, whether you have a new car, whether you got a good job, whether you're broke, doesn't matter. If you're a kind person, the Earth itself is about to become a fourth dimensional planet, and only unselfish people will be able to live here. So that's really what the drama is. And the Council of Worlds is divided up into 40 working groups, and the group that's in charge in Canada, the United States, and Mexico, North America, are the Zetas. And the Russians have their own contacts, and so do the Chinese.
And there's no doubt in your mind that this is happening.
Oh, absolutely not. No, I can telepathically contact. The Zetas don't speak. They don't have voice boxes. So they can't put things into words, whereas Pleiadians can, and a lot of other races can. But the Zetas send pictures. But I've gotten to the point where when they send a picture, it appears in my head as a picture, but also as words. So, and Janet and I together have had over 48 different incidents where we've had saucers in the yard, ETs in the yard, and even ETs in the house. So she's become quite famous. And I've been on over 700 or 800 interviews in 160 countries around the world. And we figure that over 100 million people have listened to us on the radio.
And what's been the reaction for most of these people?
Excellent. It's just unbelievable. You know, it's so hard to find in local people in Maine, people who understand what I'm talking about or friends or whatever. But I love the Internet, and I love the people who have contacted me over the Internet. And some really you know, even though I haven't met them, some of the kindest, warmest, informed people ever. And so it's really been a blessing to be able to do that. And I started a radio show on Revolution Radio, but they can't. The guy who owns the rights to that name won't sell it, so they're on this website, Freedom's Lips, which is also spelled Freedom Slips. But I've done 146 consecutive Friday night shows from midnight till 2 in the morning Eastern Time on Freedom's Lips, Studio A. And I went from about 30,000 listeners to well over 1 million now.
That's fantastic, Gordon.
Well, you know, George, you had said to me the last time I was on in 2015, you go, "You're cutting into me, Gordon. You're cutting into me." But, you know, who in the hell stays up at this hour except for me and you? You know,
and the diehards.
You can listen to my show on archives. You know, for about the same price as Coast to Coast, $5 a month, I think.
Planet X. What's going on with that?
Well, to re-explain this, it's an oceanic, volcanic, atmospheric planet, 29,000 miles in diameter. And it first was photographed by the infrared astronomical satellite, IRIS, in December of 1983. And JPL and NASA announced that they had found Planet X approaching the solar system. And the next day they said, and you got to love this, they said, "Oh, no, we haven't really found it. We're still looking." And at the same time, Ronald Reagan signed an executive order that everybody in the government had to keep this top secret. So then do you remember when Bill Clinton had the Hubble telescope fixed?
Yes.
Well, it wasn't for any reason that you might have been told or heard in the news. They wanted a picture of Planet X coming into the solar system. And it's 29,000 miles in diameter, and it's got an atmosphere, and it's got clouds, so it's sort of fuzzy looking. But as it approached the solar system, the light of the sun fully illuminated it, and it has a twin-stranded tail, one on either side, and that's the source of the pilot's wings, the winged globe, a circle with wings on either side. That's what it looks like. So once they fixed the Hubble and they focused it on Planet X, they took this picture, and it was on the Internet because they put everything from Hubble on the Internet. And people went, "Oh, my God, that's a picture of heaven." And immediately NASA took it down, but by then so many people had copied it. And you can look it up if you're a listener and you want to see this picture. And you can see why people said that. It's this glowing city with a huge circle in the center and buildings stretching out on either side. That's what it appears like. That's why they called it the picture of heaven. But that's the first actual regular photographic picture that was taken of Planet X coming in. And it entered the solar system in 1999, and then it came around the sun going clockwise as seen from above, and the Earth and all the other planets go counterclockwise. And as I've said on your shows before, and if you want me to mention it more in detail, I will, but gravity pushes, it does not pull. And so it came around, and it was pushing against the Earth, which, you know, the Earth's only 7,500 miles in diameter, but once Venus caught up and the dark twin of Earth, which nobody except the Zetas have ever mentioned, it came around from the other side of the sun, and these three planets are pushing against Planet X. So we've been stuck in this position where we're not going anywhere. And I know you've had people on your show talking about crop circles generated from the Earth, but these are clearly generated by extraterrestrials because the symbol is a cup with three balls in it, and outside the cup, at the base of the cup, is a huge ball, and that represents Planet X trying to get by the dark twin of Earth, Venus, and the Earth. And when it does get by, that's when pole shift is. Excuse me.
And when this happens, is it going to be catastrophic to most people?
Absolutely catastrophic. 9 out of 10 people on Earth will probably perish.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, you had a show recently on the Fatima prophecy.
Yes.
And that caused a couple of us to look on Zeta Talk, and in January 13th of 2005, so this is the website, zetatalk.com. You go there, they have their own search engine. They have exactly word for word the third prophecy of Fatima. And it has all the things you'd expect: tsunamis, collapsing mountains, crumbling buildings, cracks opening up and swallowing up vegetation and people and buildings and vehicles. But on top of that, it has something that's never been mentioned before, which I didn't know until I just had this read to me. I can't read it myself, unfortunately. And that is that there's so much petroleum in the tail of Planet X, it's going to actually catch fire, and it's going to be like God taking a flamethrower to people of Earth. And people are going to be drenched in burning oil and roll around and train. So this is a dim picture, to say the least.
How many people, Gordon, do you think are in the know on this?
Millions, because it's clear that all the leaders of most of the countries, I'd say 95% or more of all the countries, read Zeta Talk. And it's interesting because there's a website where Nancy takes questions from the public. Now, she started this in 95, and she takes questions from the public, and then she asks the Zetas, they give her the answer, and she types it out. Lately, we've become such good friends that she usually reads it to me to find typos, but also we discuss it before she puts it on the web. But that's where you go to read the questions and the answers, is poleshift.ning.com. And there's over 40,000 pages of questions and answers on zetatalk.com, because they get moved from poleshift.ning.com to zetatalk.com.
You know, there's always been talk, Gordon, that we cut a deal with ETs in exchange for some kind of technology. Have you heard that?
Well, it's there were several groups, and it's just like every third dimensional race and even fourth dimensional race, there are the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the government, unfortunately, made agreements with selfish ETs. They didn't realize that till later, but so the unselfish ETs had only one choice, and that's to contact everybody individually. But like I was saying, we're supposedly in the 7 of 10, but the 8 of 10 is massive social change. And so the Council of Worlds has been working very hard to educate and open this up for everyone before it happens. So the date is known. They say the date has never changed, the month, day, year, and hour. They know it, but they're not telling us. And so we have no idea when this is going to happen. So those of us who have been focused on this could happen at any minute once Planet X came around the sun, have like, when's the other shoe going to drop? But it doesn't seem to be. But on the other hand, there does seem to be, in a subtle kind of a way, a massive social change going on the planet. And one of the things that I noticed the most is people are really becoming aware of the selfish cabal and the globalists who want to control everybody. And, so I think that, some people say, well, the answer to that is populism. Well, you could have any kind of a government if it was benevolent, But right now, it's trying to have massive social change so that everyone has a chance to make a decision for themselves. Do I want to survive? Am I going to? And, I mean, it's just so interesting, these little things that you would hardly notice. But remember how in a disaster FEMA is supposed to be in charge?
Yeah, well, we saw what happened during Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah, well, guess what the president just did? He signed an executive order taking FEMA off of being in charge. Put the Department of Agriculture. So why would that be? That's because we're going to have to move millions of people from the southeastern United States and the West Coast and other places, and they're going to seize open farmland and move people there. They're not going to be in prisons. They're not going to be there for the rest of their lives. They're just going to be there until all of the dust settles, and then they can see what's left and move to where they want to move. So, there's little things like that happening. Like, for instance, Nancy, if you looked up Nancy Lieder on Wikipedia, the most awful things you could ever imagine anybody saying about anyone were described. But recently somebody went through and changed all that, and now it's all highly complimentary. And if you do a Google search for her or for me, she's like almost at the top, or if not the top, and I'm very close to the top. So somebody likes what I'm saying, and at the government levels or the powers that be levels, and they're trying to change the order of this so that people get good information. And so I'm very pleased to be able to try and help people with this, because you can survive it. You just can't give up. If you give up before you start, of course you're doomed. Simply.
What do you see, Gordon, as our biggest issue right now?
Well, our biggest issue is that there's a massive effort, the cabal, to try and cover this up, and that's what chemtrails are all about. And NASA is just such a disappointment in every possible respect. They just started an educational program for kids where they're trying to make fun out of watching for chemtrails. I couldn't even believe it when I heard it. And they've got a whole educational program, and they want kids to go out and go, oh, yeah, look, there's the chemtrails. They're going to save us from global warming. Well, that isn't what's going on at all. And the chemtrails are so that when you go outside, the sky is gray, you can't see planet X next to the sun. So on poleshift.ning, there's a part of it that says, post your Planet X pictures here. Well, I'm a photographer, and I'll tell you, half these people don't know what the hell they're doing. But the other pictures blow your mind. I mean, a picture that was taken 2 weeks ago shows the sun and the disk of Planet X at the 4 o'clock position next to it, and it's spectacular. And people should go look at this and look for themselves. And the other things I'm going to mention here, there's all kinds of evidence. You can go to, there's a free program called Earthquake 3D put out by Wolton.net, WOLTON.net. And that's the only place you should get it. You shouldn't download it from, because if you download it from somebody else, you might get a malware type of virus. Not that it'll erase your computer, but anyway, and it's free. And it shows the globe rotating, and you can scale it to all earthquakes in the last 24 hours up to the earthquakes in the last 7 days. Well, the USGS has been downgrading the size of quakes by a factor of 2. So you have a lie, covering this up. But when you look at the Earth rotating, and every place there's a quake is a circle, the bigger the quake, the bigger the circle, and there's a number coming out of it. This is, people can keep track of this themselves. They don't need to wait for me to come on every 2 years or whatever's going on. They can actually look into this themselves. And the American Meteor Society, believe it or not, they keep track of fireballs. And fireballs are rocks from the tail of Planet X. So it's got this twin-stranded tail. It's stopped in the sky, and the tail has been attracted, sort of like static electricity, to pointing at the Earth. And that's what's causing trains to crash and planes to crash. And everybody's always going, is this a Muslim jihad? No, it's the tail of Planet X causing a magnetic storm overhead. And the squeezing of the plates underneath is a piezoelectric effect with quartz in the granite crust. And you get this precursor to a lightning bolt, except there's no lightning bolt. But these modern motherboards and chips, you have 1 million transistors in an area the size of a pinky fingernail, and they're one layer thick, one molecule, and it's so easy to have an electromagnetic pulse, not the kind that takes out the whole country, but just an individual bolt short out through an airplane or onto a ship or on a train. And then it's sad because they go, well, we're charging this guy with 8 deaths for doing 106 miles an hour near Philadelphia, and he doesn't remember what happened. Well, of course he doesn't remember what happened, because a magnetic storm blew the motherboard and the train never slowed down. He was doing 106 and he should have been doing 51.
Gordon, as you look at what's been happening and the kind of information that has been leaking from the so-called Zetas, how involved do they get in our planet? I mean, would they stop a nuclear war?
Oh, definitely. All the extraterrestrials, they have a way. You know how you talk about plutonium is so dangerous because it has a half-life of 125,000 years? They can change that to 125,000th of a second. So, and you talk about hacking and stuff like that. Do you realize all our nuclear silos, all the computers in there are using 8-inch floppy disks? I mean, nothing's been upgraded. And they've demonstrated in the past, I'm sure you recall the incidents where the missiles went offline. And so they have no intention of allowing World War III, and everybody should rest more easily over that. We still have plenty of problems, though.
Stephen Bassett, the expert on exopolitics, Gordon, felt that if Hillary Clinton had been elected, we would have gotten more information about UFO disclosure. How do you feel about...
Not at all. That's the complete opposite. No.
You don't think that would have happened?
Oh, no. She was intending to start World War III. She was trying to make a deal with the Chinese that if they allowed her to have a wink-wink World War III, that she would end up as Queen of North and South America and China, and it would be okay with us if China took over Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia.
Now, what about this current administration? What does it know about ETs, if anything?
Well, I hate taking sides and getting people mad, so I'm going to try and stay away from that. The fact is that extraterrestrials are working with Donald Trump. They are working with Vladimir Putin, and they are working with Xi, the president of China. And the three of them have agreed there's going to be no World War III. So the Russians...
What are they going to do about Korea, North Korea?
Well, that's a good question. The Council of Worlds says they blew up the first three missiles, and then they didn't blow up the fourth one. And I thought, why not? Because the one the other day, it went off successfully.
It was successful, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought, well, when you blow it up on the pad or just off the pad, you have no idea what went wrong. It could have been a million things. But when it flies 400 miles successfully, then we're on to something here. So I think that they might have allowed this one because it really was intimidating to China and Russia because it flew west instead of south or east. So, but I don't really know what's going on with that. But you know how SpaceX was going to land a missile, and they did several times on a barge.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's been successful. Not reliable, but successful.
But do you know why they were planning to do that?
No.
Because they were trying to create colonies on the moon and Mars for their elite billionaires to leave the Earth at pole shift. And they decided that if they had a launch pad on Earth, on land, that millions of people would show up saying, I want to be saved too. But by putting the missile on a barge, the billionaires could approach the barge on their yachts and climb on board and go off to the moon or Mars. So that's not being allowed. And every single flight that was for a humanitarian purpose, like to service the...
when were they going to go?
Well, that's the thing, is they're so far behind in it that they're never going to be able to have a base on the moon or Mars. And these Zetas, but all the unselfish extraterrestrials say this is a graduation class here. This is the final exam, and nobody's being allowed to cut it. You're going to have to stay here whether you like it or not.
Gordon, what do you hear about the secret space program?
Oh, geez, I hear a lot about that, and very little that the Zetas say about it. But I have to believe there's a lot going on with that because I believe that we did have a separate astronaut academy out at Vandenberg, and we had our own secret space shuttle program, and we have, the Aurora taken off from Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean and going to Mars twice a week. I mean, you look at Gary McKinnon hacking into the Navy and getting up a list of off-Earth crew on ships, spaceships, obviously. So the Zetas won't say anything about that, and there is a reason for that. On the fourth dimension, the next dimension above where we are now, which we're moving to slowly, at that dimension, they have to negotiate with selfish people to say anything about them. And they really don't care about promoting anything that selfish people are doing, so they don't really want to engage in that negotiation, and so they don't. And so a lot of times when you read Zeta Talk, you think, oh, if only one more question to be answered. But the Zeta's attitude is, look, the most important thing you have to figure out is, are you going to be selfish or unselfish, and are you going to survive pole shift or not? So they don't really care what you think about the secret space program. But with all the things that are mentioned about it, I've come to the conclusion myself, not from the Zetas, but from myself, that there is something to it, but I can't put my finger on it exactly. But I'm sure that it's there.
Are we still going through a number of contactee cases? Are they getting, people are getting abducted?
Well, see, when you say abducted, it seems like it's against your will. And
right.
The thing is about people is an extraterrestrial consciousness is unified, whereas a human's consciousness is like a bomb going off. The lower self says, I know, the subconscious says, let's say that an extraterrestrial comes through the wall and says, you're coming with me. Now, the lower self would say, I know love hurts, how are you going to hurt me? The conscious mind would say, I know this must be illegal, and I'm going to report you as soon as I can. But your superconscious mind goes, I know we're all brothers and sisters, how can I help you? You see, so they're dealing with different feelings on it. But I've always felt that I was, a reincarnated extraterrestrial, and that Janet, my wife, is the same, and plenty of other people who I've met and know. And so, we're here to try and speed this up and make a good outcome for it.
We've talked about how you said the Zetas would step in and save us from a nuclear war, but I always thought that they could not interrupt.
Well, I'll give you an example. The other day there was a video, perhaps you saw it, where there's this dense cloud, and it looks like it's about to form a tornado. And in the center, cold air was descending, and in the edges, the hot air was rising, and that was about to begin the rotation for a tornado. And people said, what in the hell are these UFOs doing, going in and out of this cloud? So the Zetas took that as a question, and they said, this is an unselfish community below the cloud, and they do not deserve to die. And we said, the Zetas said, that they would help unselfish people wherever they found them, in communities or individually, whatever the situation. And that's not only at pole shift, but even now. So the saucers were heating the cold air in the center and cooling the warm air on the outside, and they absolutely stopped the rotation so a tornado did not hit that town.